Welcome to the Deschutes County Board of Commissioners meeting for 8:30 a.m. Wednesday, September 20th, 2023. First item on the agenda is Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So we are starting a little bit early today. We've kind of backed up our schedule just for stuff we want to be at the Family Access Network fan lunch today at noon. So we want to get some items done and we will have our public hearing on the incorporation at 9 o'clock today. So at this time, is there a citizen input on any item that is not on the agenda? Anybody in the room or anyone online? Okay. So at this point, we will move to the consent agenda. 4 items today.
So moved.
Second.
3 sets of minutes, just acknowledging. Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Okay, thank you. Item number 5, request to add 0.2 regular FTE health services for language access work. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
We'll get you in and out of here real quick today.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Jillian Weiser, the Compliance and Quality Assurance Officer with Health Services.
And I'm Cheryl Smallman, Business Officer with Health Services.
Good morning.
And we're here today to request adding a 0.2 regular FTE to cover some language access work within our department.
Right now, we have a position that's 0.8 regular. That in this position, we'd like to add that additional 0.2 regular ongoing. We have a grant fund with Pacific Source Behavioral Health Workforce Diversity Workforce Grant that is able to cover this position, the additional 0.2 through this fiscal year, and then it would be a part of the departmental indirects ongoing. That adds about 22,000 plus COLA and any other increases annually to administrative services budget.
Understood. So yeah, we'll round out that position. It's good to have these grant dollars to get us up, get us started on this project too.
Attributing that additional 0.2 to indirect over time is justified just by the improved effectiveness of service delivery by having these language access services.
Yes, that's correct. We're required to provide a qualified healthcare interpreter, which will be one of the duties of this position. And so if we don't have that available internally, we then need to pay for that through a vendor externally. So this would allow us to cover internally rather than incurring that cost externally.
Great. So any other discussion or a motion?
And does this need to be 2 parts because of the regular versus short term and for the 0.2 and for the regular, or is it okay to do it as one motion?
One motion should be fine.
So I'll move approval to add 0.2 regular FTE within the health services fund.
I'll second the motion.
Any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Adair,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes.
Okay.
Thank you so
I
much.
anticipate the resolution would be on consent next week. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, item number 6, grant from Natural Resources Conservation Service for Oregon Living with Fire. Good morning, Joe.
Well, good morning, everyone. Good morning. For the record, Joe Stutler, Senior Advisor. Thanks for the time today. So in your packet was a request. We've been working on this for several months and finally have everything together. So the executive summary is NRCS is the first, someone is on our steering committee for Oregon Living with Fire. So they are really interested in working with the various CWPPs that we have, correct that, community wildfire preparedness plans, to or Joint Chiefs and some of the other funding they get. So with that, they're willing to contribute $150,000 over the next 5 years to the Oregon Living with Fire program. When you look at this, you look at the contribution from the Forest Service and certainly the other 4 counties. This essentially makes the program solvent for the next 5 years, which is a good stroke. No match. So another good deal, I think, for Oregon Living with Fire. And so we'll be adding some emphasis items on our program of work to connect NRCS folks with the various CWPPs we have in the county, and I think it's a good outcome for them to particularly treat private lands around communities, creating those resilient landscapes, of course, which is part of the cohesion strategy and protecting communities. And so I think if there's an added emphasis because of the way the federal fiscal year works, the ends here in about a week or so. So it's going to be important to get the chair's signature on this agreement, get it back to them so they can allocate the money this fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. So that's a request.
Just acknowledging, yeah, so this is kind of the conduit between the federal efforts, cohesive strategy, just like you mentioned, Joint Chiefs vision of all hands and all lands, really reducing the fire risk, and it fits real well into all the efforts we're doing. We have Project Wildfire locally, trying to get more, fire-wise communities, but also the CWPPs for looking for just optimal areas for fuel reduction and community safety.
Correct.
I have a couple questions.
You bet.
Do you know what program within NRCS these funds are coming through?
It would just similar as the Forest Service grant that comes into an account in Deschutes County, and then we expend those monies along with the money we get from the 4 counties. For the Forest Service, there's a match. For NRCS, there's not. So it comes right into the county budget as a reimbursable, if you will.
Yeah, I was just trying to understand. NRCS has EQIP program. They've got that SIP program, and like they have these various buckets at NRCS. I was just curious which fund, or which program these does.
I wish I had the answer. I don't have that. So yeah.
Maybe you can
I could find that out for you.
Get back to me later.
Yeah, I will do that. Thank you.
That was one question. And then when I looked at the scope of work in the agreement for this project, it looked like the kind of overall scope of work for Oregon Living with Fire. I didn't see I didn't see NRCS specific items. So I guess I was just wondering, are they're signing up to support the program overall? They don't have any particular, we want you to do X for private landowners that are going to be deliverables for us from this.
You bet. No, it's a good question. So the answer is they support, the program of work for Oregon Living with Fire. They support it for the 4 counties where the landscape is, but in our discussions about what good would look like, they're really interested in making those connections to the various CWPPs, the private land, and to be able to implement their programs between Joint Chiefs, stewardship, those kind of things. So,
okay.
Yep, you bet.
So yeah, is there a motion or any other discussion?
Oh, I was yesterday at the FireWise meeting with Kevin Moriarty, our forester. They were talking about the fact that now we're up to almost 70 FireWise communities in Deschutes counties. I don't know. I heard that we're maybe leading the nation, but there's always more communities that could join and be educated. And there's within that group, there's another group that's actually trying to educate. And I believe those meetings they're having once a month on Wednesday afternoons. And I thought Lon, who's leading that, is it's really important for people that are interested in what you can do to make your community safer. Please join that group for more education, something kind of related to you, Joe.
Yeah, we're aware of that. And obviously our folks from Oregon Living with Fire will be participating in that. Just a brief historical perspective. In 2004, there were no FireWise communities in Oregon, not one. So the Fall Creek community became the very first one in Oregon. And so now then, I think there's less than 100 in the state of Oregon, of which 70 are just in Deschutes County, and there's still room to grow with that. But surprisingly, the state that has the most fire waste communities is Arkansas, if you can believe that. I had no idea. I missed that trivia pursuit, big time. But I think
Oh, I know why. Their Congressman, Bruce Westerman, actually has his degree in forestry from Yale. So apparently he's been really working on that. But yeah, he is heading natural resources in Congress now, but he is a forester through the Yale program. So that's a little backstory.
good connection there. We're good.
Yeah.
Unless I'm mistaken, I'm certain that Deschutes County leads the state in terms of number of fire waste communities, which is a good deal. So
We're actually certified at 63, but I think we've got at least 7 that are in process.
yeah,
But we definitely could probably use another 20, don't you think?
at least.
Yeah, at least.
We'll get to 3 digits pretty quick. I suspect.
Yeah, we need to get to 100. So great.
I'll move approval of chair's signature of document number 2023-875, an intergovernmental agreement with the Natural Resources Conservation Service for grant funding for the Oregon Living with Fire program.
I'll second the motion.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Adair,
Yes.
and chair votes yes.
Great. Well, thank you.
Yeah, we'll get that signature right away here for you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. All right. Enjoy your days.
Thank you. So looking at the schedule, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. I do want to do a time certain for the public hearing for Mountain View petition to incorporate. So two different options. I'm thinking we could move item number 8 up. So a discussion of AG Tucker building removal. And if there's support for that, I think Lee was, he was just here a moment ago.
He said he was coming back.
Yeah. And then, as I say, we can also do other items. And I can take a moment. I don't know if you have the paperwork on that, what we just passed. I'll sign that right now. So as I say, we may even take a 5 or 10 minute break before 9 o'clock just to, acknowledge the 9 o'clock public hearing published time. So we'll wait for Lee Randall at this point, and we'll move item number 8 will be next, and then we'll get back to the other public hearing. Is there any other items we want to share at this time? Stuff we've done in the last few days.
I did have a conversation this morning with Chief Justice Marco Hernandez about our meeting next Thursday afternoon with the building department of the Ninth Circuit Court. So we were just having our weekly conversation about looking ahead to next week. So anyway, thank you, Whitney, for setting up that Zoom link.
Doug Riggs, our state lobbyist, was in town yesterday, and there was just a little sit down. I was able to sit down with him. Nick Lelak and Jen Patterson were in the room. So we just kind of talked about some of the different topics, nothing official, just acknowledging to my other commissioners that I was able to talk to Doug yesterday. So, and he's available for all of us. You can make phone calls and do what you want to do during this, kind of quiet period right before prepping for the next legislative session. Also, the mayor in Redmond called a meeting yesterday, and it was just to sit down again, talking about large event traffic and parking issues for the fairgrounds. Just the concept that we are, our fair director is taking it to the next level. There's large events that happen this year that are coming back next year. It sounds like we've heard already that Overland Expo and the Farewell Festival and stuff like that. So it's just in coordination for the city of Redmond, the best information we have. And it's all about just traffic patterns and parking, basically, was the concept. Airport director Zach Bass was there, the mayor and myself, and Jeff Hines. and Nick and Whitney.
Do you want to share what the outcomes of that meeting were?
Oh, the fact that, yeah, I mean, there's no magic, solution, the traffic pattern getting to the airport, the roads, the entrances and exits to the fairgrounds are what they are right now. When they can, very much direct, the traffic, just like we see at the exit of the fair, they can definitely take a 2 or 3 hour event and get it to 45 minutes. But there was a new dynamic, which is a lot of people, some people that came from out of town expect to walk from a farther distance. So people were parking on the business roads around the fairgrounds, expecting to just walk across. So then their traffic flow stopped because people were walking across the road, and then people weren't familiar with the area. So they were walking across the road and back the road. And, sometimes 2 and 3 times people were just pedestrians more than we see at the fairgrounds, because people in the fairgrounds are residents and they understand the flow of things. So it's just the dynamics really kind of, really challenged everything there, even though it had a good traffic pattern. And they used other overflow parking on the property. So even when the main areas were able to exit, some of the back parking areas kind of ended up gridlocked because people didn't know which way they wanted to go when they were leaving. So as I say, there was just really, and this is referring to the Farewell Festival was the big one, really learning that even though they had these good plans that worked during the fair, they get kind of undermined by the unexpected responses of people that aren't familiar with the area. So, I mean, that was it. That was kind of what we learned yesterday.
It was a massive number of people, and I've definitely emphasized to Jeff that with the huge area to the east of the main fairground campus that is open and flat, that if they made camping for the festival available to people for that period, they could take hundreds of cars off the road.
Yep.
And give people a place to walk from that's completely unobstructed.
Well, that was very much discussed. In fact, Nick, if you want to step in, yeah.
I'm happy to. It was a very collaborative meeting, and I just captured quickly, I think, 9 items that we brainstormed yesterday. And then I shared those with our road department director, Chris Doty, and he shared a couple of additional options. So not to expect any of these to happen for sure. They'll all just for discussion, but potential for paid parking. It might reduce the number of single occupant users. Maybe it'll encourage more people to carpool together. We need to address emergency services going forward, access to the property during the events and after the events, and potentially combining that with a shuttle route that might for internal circulation, just as a possibility. Potential posted no parking signs on the southbound for 19th Street that goes down, because what happened was that a lot of people would park southbound, and then they would have to do a U-turn in the road, and that would really impede traffic going north to then go over to the U Avenue interchange. We talked about identifying remote parking lots, such as at the high schools. The importance, and as Commissioner DeBonne just mentioned, of a pedestrian and bicycle plan and pathways. We talked about the southern extension of 19th Street. And of course, what does that mean? That may mean to McVeigh, it could mean to Quarry, it could mean to Elkhorn, but various options. And we've all known that that's a big part of the large lot industrial going forward in the future. We talked about the future potential roundabout design at 19th and Airport Way to accommodate large traffic volumes and how that would function and flow. And then additional on-site camping and potentially on the adjacent properties in coordination with those property owners, such as the Department of State Lands. So we'd want to work with everybody to see for all of the reasons we discussed. Chris mentioned the potential for additional law enforcement support for flagging at the U Avenue interchange, messaging to airport traffic to really use Veterans Way during egress times needed for fair and farewell. So a lot of ideas, and there was a lot of support, just a starting point to talk about this, because our Fair and Expo Center is incredibly successful, and we want to continue to support it going forward. So great discussion yesterday to begin. And one of the things I think Jeff Hines mentioned is that we continue to learn and improve every day, but then something would change during farewell. So it was a very productive discussion.
And camping was definitely discussed, and it's really part of the event operator too. They need to plug it into their plan. So this year was, the first and kind of unknown variables for them. Now that they've been here, they've set up, they've taken apart, they're going to do their debrief. And yeah, we'll figure out what the options are in partnership. And as I say, they also learned that during the music event festival, the Farewell Festival, everybody basically stayed for the headliner and the finish of the headliner. So it was a one mass exit. Was different than the fair, because we know at a fair and rodeo, we kind of separate that a little bit. Overland Expo, people are coming and going the whole time. So just that the concert was the big nut to crack.
You turn your mic up and you're back here.
Well, good. Thank you very much for saying that. So I think it can be adjusted. We'll speak just a little closer to the mics also. So as I say, at this time, is there anything other items? This is just what we're doing at this moment.
I'll just mention I'm going to the Redmond Economic Development Board retreat this afternoon.
Great. Yeah, and we're working with that. And then tomorrow is a District 2 meeting for the Association of Oregon Counties down in Klamath Falls. So I think all three of us are going to be there.
And I did have dinner last night with Gina Nichols, the director of AOC. So great to stay in touch with Gina. And yes, she will be on her way to Klamath Falls today.
Okay, so as I say, at this time, respecting the schedule for a 9 o'clock public hearing on the Mountain View petition, we are going to move item number 8 ahead of it. So this is a discussion about the A.J. Tucker building removal. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you. Lee Randall, Facilities Department Director. Eric Nielsen, Capital Improvement Manager. And so, yeah, I'll give you a brief background, and then we'll describe a few options that we've considered over the years, and then seek board direction. So first, I would like to highlight some of the outreach that we've done. As you know, back in March and April, the building was listed for sale, which is required under the City of Bend Landmarks Commission code, the planning code. Through that, we had some interested parties that we've stayed in touch with. We let them know that we'd be talking about the topic today. And I also wanted to touch on a question that come up recently regarding the courthouse expansion and some of the federal ARPA funds that would be used in the expansion. It is our understanding in working with finance that those funds would not trigger a Section 106 historic review under the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. There's some express information that was provided to counties with the delivery of those funds, that it's considered a ministerial transfer of funds through the federal agency, and that Section 106 would not apply. So that's our working approach right now going forward regarding part of the funding for the courthouse expansion.
Well, and I'll acknowledge that. So that we did receive a letter from Kelly Cannon Miller. She is the director at the Deschutes County Historical Society. I was able to attend the board meeting a couple of weeks ago and previously. So 2 months in a row, I mentioned as a topic that A.J. Tucker building is a discussion about a historical resource that we've been working around or working through. And then also, what was the other topic? She had 2 things she was talking about in there. But so as I say, the board, it wasn't a board discussion, I guess. At the Historical Society, it's a message. So she's an informative individual, and she provided that information to us, but it wasn't the official position of the Historical Society board.
So looking at the process and looking at the A.J. Tucker building over at least the last 7 years, in the agenda request, I did outline 4 options that we've reviewed, but even within those, there's a variety of options that we've really chased to ground. Initially, we looked at potentially building.
Can I just interrupt you for one moment? In your letter, though, this morning or yesterday's letter, the email, it did say you intend to work with county legal to confirm this conclusion that it does not apply. Has county legal confirmed that?
We have not had an opportunity to review that at this time.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. And so, for instance, we looked at building essentially a replica of the building, reusing the stone. One of the challenges with the building is that if we were to try and move it as a whole, we wouldn't be able to meet life safety standards in retrofitting the building once it was placed somewhere. So initially we looked at options of placing it at the historical museum downtown at various locations here on the downtown campus. And as I mentioned, those options were quite cost prohibitive and costs continue to go up. So and at that time, we discussed it with Kelly Cannon Miller and with the Historical Society to look at those options. The next step at this point is for us to submit an application to the City of Bend Planning Department and Landmarks Commission. We have an architectural firm that has been working with us on that application. And so today we're here to lay out what we feel are viable options, seek board direction, and then submit that application. So in looking at the options that we reviewed, as I mentioned, the whole building move is whether the building could be moved or not. Once it's placed somewhere, it would be extremely difficult to meet current life safety standards to be able to use that building as a public building. And all of those would be quite costly, potentially $1 million plus to do the move, site development, and retrofit the building. We'd also, as I mentioned, within that category, looked at building a replica, so to speak. A next option would be select demolition and relocation of the facade. As the board is aware, we'd looked at some options on Wall Street for that. Again, I list what our cost estimates are in the agenda request here. Upwards of $450,000, not including the permitting fees and the architectural and engineering work. We currently just have a conceptual design and a rendering that would show that. And again, the cost to demo the building just itself to move on would be in the neighborhood of $120,000. And then the third option that we'd looked at is select demolition and cataloging of the stone facade for a potential transfer to a private party or for use in the future. It would involve selectively reviewing or selectively demoing. Excuse me one moment. Thought I silenced this. So select demo and cataloging of the stone facade. The facade itself is really the most historically significant part of the building. We would be able to have a mason selectively demo it, catalog, use a rendering to show where those stones were originally, place them on pallets, have an inventory of those so that they could be potentially used in the future for a replica of some site of some sort if a private party wished to do that.
Lee, where would the pieces be stored?
We could potentially, I'm imagining it'd be in the 10 to 15 pallet range. So we have a couple different storage yards that are county property and that are utilized by the facilities department. So I think we could store them there, I anticipate. Also, I think we would want to include in our application a sunset clause for that storage so that over a period of time, if we weren't able to identify an end user, then they would be disposed of. And that could be 3 years, it could be 5 years. But I don't think it would be prudent to go into that process, assuming we would store them indefinitely. The last would just be simply demoing the building. And again, that estimated cost for the demo itself is around $120,000. At this point, from the facilities department perspective and in working with our historic architectural consultant, our view is that we could submit an application for that option 3, the select demolition and cataloging of the stone facade. We have that cost available in our budget this year to be able to do that. We feel that would be a good faith application on the part of the county to the City of Bend Landmarks Commission, and we could move forward with that application. The final part is that as part of the new courthouse construction, in the location where the AJ Tucker building currently is. There would be a monument to the AJ Tucker building. There would be a historic placard that describes what had been there, its use, and provides some history for the site. So that we would do irrespective of the options that are chosen here, but that would also be part of our application to the city. So to close, that's the recommendation that we wanted to bring to the board today for your direction. That option 3, select demolition and cataloging of the stone facade. And then our goal would be to submit the application this month. And we would likely, we'll know more after the application is submitted, but in the next month or so, we would likely be in front of the City of Bend Landmarks Commission.
Well, and that's a good point. The fact that, we're making a decision here to put direction to it, but we're still applying and acknowledging it in that very public process. So just back to the basics here. So this is a kind of hand laid stone structure, the front and the sides. I think, is the back integrated with the current building?
No, it's not. With the current courthouse.
That's what
they do stand separately. And we've done some investigation of the footings. We hand dug around at several locations. There really isn't a footing to the building. The stones were just laid in a trench and then stacked. The back part of the building, we would consider the west side, we would consider that a rubble wall. At one point, I don't think it was intended to be exposed. And then the last about 30 feet of the north end of the building, portions of that were a later addition that was filled in. So there's actually modern masonry block on the north wall of the building.
So then when we talk about the facade, are we truly just speaking about the facade on Greenwood, one wall?
That's our intent, the south facing wall.
So and I think it's a doorway and 2 windows, arch, hand laid. I mean, there's some history there, but that's what we're talking about, is that one wall, one face.
And Lee, I think one really important thing to emphasize here is that we did make the building available to basically anyone who wanted to come get it. And could you describe that process for us and the results again of that solicitation or like open offer?
Right. So that process is very specifically laid out in the City of Bend Planning Code, and it's a requirement if someone is going to move, demo, any type of alteration to a major alteration to a building, to offer it for sale to the public on the premise that it would be moved. So we did that for a period of time. We didn't receive any response. We did receive some responses asking for more time to consider it. And so we did, I believe it was about a week or 10-day, may have been a 10-day extension for the RFP period. And in the end, we didn't receive, it was a sealed bid RFP, and we did not receive any responses. It did highlight the building for the public. As I said earlier, I've stayed in touch with a few of the interested parties who had just asked that we keep them apprised as the process moved along. And so it was a public process. It was carried by the news, and it was so that our community was made aware of the general direction of the county.
And so right now we're considering expending out of our pocket somewhere between 120,000 to
I would put it in the $200,000 range between demo, cataloging the stones. We will have some additional, one, there'll be the permitting process, so there are costs associated with that, and then additional architectural work to provide some detailed drawings that the masons can work off of, not only to deconstruct the facade, but so that those plans are available in the future if a private party were interested in reconstructing it. We would have those plans available with detailed drawings to provide to whoever we transferred the product to be able to construct it in a manner that matches the original.
So at the time that we did this solicitation or this open offer, we didn't tell people we might be willing to spend $150,000, $200,000. do you think from the people who were interested, but, you know, did not put in offers? If you said that, you know, hey, if we gave you $150,000, would you consider making an offer on this building? Is there a chance that some of those people that you spoke to would be motivated by that?
I don't think I could speak for any of them directly. I'd be hesitant to do that. I would say that 150, based on our estimates and even conversations with some of those folks, that 150 to 200,000 would be a small percentage of the overall cost to essentially replicate the building. And again, it may be possible to move it. The challenge, if you move it, is meeting life safety standards and the permitting process to put it in place somewhere else. And so that's what brought us back to essentially you would build a shell somewhere, take down the stones, and then re-erect them as a veneer on a modern building that was built as a replica of the A.J. Tucker building. So even the first time we did this exercise and explored this with the Historical Society, our estimate back then in 2017 was in the neighborhood of $500,000 to $600,000. And so our estimation at this point would be that it would be well over $1 million. And we didn't do this time around a specific line item conceptual cost estimate for that. But in extrapolating the kinds of cost increases we've had in construction, that would be our where we think it would land.
Okay, I originally I got my degree from the University of Oregon in history, and I think history is really important. And this building is over 100 and, you know, it's 104 years old and it's stone. And I know at times we had talked about perhaps moving it and seeing what happens with the direction of our our fairgrounds, but like actually moving the stone there and then recreating it with some plan, because I do feel it is, it would be really disappointing to lose that part of our history. And if that's really what we have today, you know, I think it's worth saving as far as taking it apart and recreating it somewhere at the fairgrounds. There's, you know, we have, what is it, a couple hundred acres there?
And you know, our historical consultant could speak more clearly to this, but within the application, there are clear guidelines set out by the National Park Service for historic buildings, which give a list of priorities. And the first priority, of course, is to keep it in place. The second priority would be to, I believe, relocate it very close to its original location. And then you kind of go down the priorities from there that are laid out by the National Park Service to the last priority, which would be to demo it. So if we did move forward
It's
with
14 miles. Is that too far to recreate it up there? I mean, just the front.
Yeah, and I'm not an expert in historic architecture, but when we talked about that, the idea was that the preference is to keep it as close to its original location and setting as possible. That doesn't preclude obviously moving it to the fairgrounds. And I think that's one option that would still be open to us if we were to apply and be successful in our application to catalog the stones and store them. It would still be within the county's purview to be able to reconstruct that facade at a different location. And we could come to the board with some options in the future. But submitting our application now, with the understanding or with the stipulation that we would selectively demo the building, catalog the facade for possible future use, it would allow us to explore those types of options and provide costs to the board.
What about with the parking plan that you're going to do around the corner from Worrell? What about in there? I thought originally I saw a schematic where it was, you know, they recreated it there, the facade.
Yeah, and that's option 2 that we outline here, that the challenge with reconstructing the facade is the height, the width, and the weight of the stone. And so you have to build a structure that can support wind loads, et cetera, for that height and width. And so that's what as well as site development to kind of create a plaza in that location. So that's where we ended up with the $450,000 estimate to build that structure, relocate the stone, provide the needed site development. And then as well, on top of that, we'll still, with all of these, have the approximately $120,000 cost of demoing the rest of the building in place.
So do we need to wait for legal then?
I actually just got a email from Dave Doyle, our county counsel, and he said that he had an opportunity to review the materials that were sent by Dan and Lee. And he's in agreement that it is, that nothing further is necessary. under
Okay.
106.
Thank you, Kim.
Really like the idea of cataloging the stone facade and thinking about using it at the fairgrounds. So when I first read that idea, I was troubled by the idea of taking it down, carefully cataloging it when to me, it doesn't seem realistic that there's someone's going to come forward and say they want it. So it's, I mean, a good effort, but maybe just a waste of work and money in the long run. But if there's possibility that when we move forward with the master planning for the fairgrounds, we might be able to use that somewhere, then the idea of carefully taking down the facade and cataloging it for potential future use, it seems like there's more opportunity for that to actually really add up to something. And I guess I would also say that we really need to be concerned about keeping our courthouse project under budget or on budget, and the additional $400,000 that would take to reconstruct the facade over the cataloging option. That is a big chunk of money, and that could very well be one of the things that busts our budget for the courthouse project. And I'm not supportive of that right now.
So the other activity could be the High Desert Museum too, right next to the sawmill, maybe.
Oh, yes, thank you. My
Well,
grandparents saw.
So, but what I think, and as I say, I support select demolition and cataloging the stone facade. So I think it looks like maybe that's where we'll go today. And then, as I say, when I think of the fairgrounds, I mean, if put in perspective, this is not a very large facade that we're talking about. And if I don't know where we could put it at the fairgrounds, it wouldn't just look like this little teeny stone archway next to big buildings. So I'm just thinking
That's why
there's
we-
architectural review.
Right. You'd hire the
where-
right person.
Yeah.
And if you know that that's your vision, it's just like, the second house I
Yeah.
built, I had a vision. So
There you go.
Yeah.
Well, and then as I say, the High Desert Museum, they do have some smaller structures, and then there may be able to fit it there, but that would be a follow-on project. I do support that. We got the buzz going. I mean, people heard about this when we were offering it, and I got phone calls directly saying, "Man, I'd love that there." And then I'd love it on my property. It was more rural properties, and but the cost, and it is just a simple stone facade, basically 3 openings on the front. So there is historical value there.
Well, I think of the mason that did the rock that came from when they dug up from my pond, and the mason, and his name was Mason, and the wonderful work that he did. And those people are such artists. It's really bigger than us, and it's really something that should be saved. And I believe cataloged, saved, and then I know we can find an excellent location for it. Maybe we don't know it today, but we will have that vision soon.
Well, this will put direction to those opportunities too. So is there a motion?
Yeah, that's on schedule. Yeah, I'll move approval of submission of application to the city of Bend for removal of the AJ Tucker building located at 202 Greenwood in Bend, going with the select demolition and cataloging of stone facade option.
And I second it.
Okay, any other discussion? Seeing none, Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. Thank you so much. Thanks for being so professional about this.
Thank you, Kim.
So at this time, that was item number 8. We're working back to our item number 7, a public hearing, Mountain View petition to incorporate This will be a public hearing and a little bit of formality to get started. There will be, opportunities to testify, and we'll explain that whole procedure at this time. So officially with the hearings process, this is the time and place set for hearing regarding file number 24723-587-TA. This is a public hearing to gather testimony on a petition to incorporate the city of Mountain View. Staff will outline the hearing procedures that will be followed.
Thank you, Commissioners. For the record, my name is Nicole Mardell, and I'm a senior planner with Deschutes County Community Development. Oh, thank you. Can you hear me now? Great. Okay, and I did, for the AV staff, I did share a PowerPoint, if you could pull that up on the screen. So again, my name is Nicole Mardell, and I'm a senior planner with Deschutes County Community Development. Today, the Board of Commissioners will take testimony and receive written evidence concerning a petition to incorporate the city of Mountain View. First, staff will explain the hearing procedures, which will then be followed by a brief staff presentation. Then the testimony portion of the hearing will begin. The petitioner will present first, then agencies and government bodies. Next, persons in support will testify, and then those in opposition will testify last. Afterward, the petitioner will then be afforded an opportunity to present rebuttal testimony, and staff, if requested, can make closing comments. Staff notes the full record is found on the project website, deschutes.org/Mountain View Incorporation, and that includes all materials that have been submitted thus far in the process. This is a hybrid public hearing with both in-person and remote participation via Zoom. Before starting your testimony, please provide your first and last name as well as your mailing address. I will note that the board has established testimony time limits. The applicant will have 45 minutes for their presentation. Agencies will have 10 minutes. Members of the public will each have 3 minutes, and the applicant will then have 10 minutes for their rebuttal. For our in-person participants, if you wish to testify, please fill out a blue sign-up sheet at the side of the room and submit it to the board's executive assistant, Brenda, to the left of the dais. Chairman DeBone will call up in-person participants for their testimony. After your name is called, please come up to one of these tables at the front of the room before beginning your testimony. And as a reminder to all, just remember to speak up and into the microphones. For our remote participants, if you wish to testify, you must be logged into Zoom or have called in using the Zoom dial-in option. When Chairman DeBone asks if anyone would like to testify, you'll need to use the raise hand feature, which is shown here. To notify the board that you'd like to speak. To do this, you'll press that raise hand button, or if you're called in, you'll dial *9. If you'd like to submit written testimony and you're here in person, please hand that to me. If you're participating remotely, you can submit your written testimony to my email, which is shown here. The chair and staff are responsible for conducting an orderly hearing process. Any testimony or behavior which is inappropriate will be addressed and may result in that member of the public being removed from the hearing. Chair DeBone, I will now return to the script and note that the commissioners must disclose any ex parte contacts, prior hearing observations, biases, or conflicts of interest.
So does any commissioner have anything to disclose? And if so, please state the nature of the same and whether you can proceed.
I have nothing to disclose and I can proceed.
I have nothing to disclose and I can proceed.
So I have just experience being a resident of Southern Deschutes County during the Lapine Incorporation and studied the record, but I have no conflicts of interest and I can proceed. So at this time, does any party wish to challenge any commissioner, a member of the hearing body, based on ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts? So this is an opportunity for challenging us as the hearings body. Is there anybody online with the raised hand feature?
No.
So seeing none, as no challenges are presented prior to opening the hearing, does anyone have any procedural objections to the public hearing? Is there anyone online with a raised hand feature on this topic? So seeing none, the hearing is now open. Staff will proceed with a brief staff report on the topic.
Thank you very much, Chair and Commissioners. I would like to note that we do have a copy of our full staff report at the side of the room on the table here. That includes much more detailed analysis, and our staff report will be pretty short for the sake of time today. So if you'd like more information, please do pick up a copy of that staff report, or it's also available on that project website. The purpose of the public hearing today is to consider a petition for the proposed city of Mountain View. The boundary is proposed to cover 265 square miles and 618 or so tax lots. Approximately 75% of the property in the boundary is federally owned and 94% is resource zoned, which is intended to be used for farm or forestry activities. The county clerk's records note that there are about 77 registered voters in the boundary, and our county assessor records note that there are approximately 27 dwellings that have been inventoried for assessment taxation purposes, but we wanted to note that they may or may not have been legally established. Staff wanted to clarify the boundary that is under review today, as the applicant provided an amended boundary image into the record via email. So we wanted to clarify that the image to the right, which was included in the original petition to incorporate application package, is the boundary that is under review. Staff did receive quite a few agency comments and public comments. So we've received 9 agency comments in total from those agencies listed here. Staff wanted to note, since the staff report was published, we did receive a letter from the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and also just last evening, the Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs. I did print out a copy of the letter from the tribes as it was submitted after hours yesterday, and I've also provided a copy of that to the applicant as well. We've also received public comment. I will note that some individuals did provide multiple public comments, but in terms of the number of individuals, we had 10 submit letters in support and about 22 in opposition of the proposal. To provide a bit of background on incorporations, ORS 221-010 in Oregon statute outlines the requirements for a city to incorporate. There are 2 minimum requirements a petitioner has to meet in order to initiate the incorporation process. The first is the petitioner would need to gather signatures from at least 20% of registered voters in the boundary, which the petitioner has done. And the second requirement is that you would need to confirm that there are at least 150 residents residing in the proposed boundary. Staff has concerns with this second requirement, as there was not enough information in the record to confirm that there are 150 people residing in this proposed boundary area. In terms of the process, because the 20% of registered voters did sign on to the petition, the county was able to accept it, which initiated this hearing process. Any person can participate in this hearing process and testify on the proposed incorporation. And the next step, if it were to be approved, is that this petition would move on to a ballot initiative in which only those that are registered to vote in the proposed boundary could weigh in on whether or not to officially incorporate and create their new local government.
Nicole, at what point along the way in this process is this question about whether there's 150 residents resolved?
It's my understanding, and I'll also look to Stephanie, our legal counsel here, is that this is one of the items that staff raised to you during this public hearing process. So we believe that that would be an item for discussion during today's hearing. But with that, I'll turn it over to Stephanie Marshall, our legal counsel.
Good morning. For the record, Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. That's an excellent question. And if you refer to the statute 221-020, it states that the people of an area, no part of which lies in an unincorporated in an incorporated city and in which 150 persons reside may incorporate a city by approving at an election called and held according to ORS 221-031 to 221-061, a proposition provided by those sections for incorporating the city. So my analysis of this is it's almost like a backwards standing requirement, because you can go and get signatures from people that are registered to vote. to submit your proposed petition and start this process. However, under state law, this group of people in an area must be at least 150 persons. So my interpretation of that is that if the board were to say, yes, we're going to send this for a vote, that could be nullified essentially. If you don't have 150 people residing in the area, then the incorporated city would not meet this basic requirement of 221.020. So it is a consideration for the board. There are also the 3 criteria that Nicole's about to go over, but it really comes down to a question of, is there standing? I mean, is this something that this group of persons that wish to incorporate, are there even enough to meet the basic requirement in 221.020?
I guess my question is if this issue could invalidate the results of an election, wouldn't it make sense to resolve whether there's 150 people or not before you send a measure to the ballot?
That would be my recommendation, yes, based on the statute. Otherwise, it's essentially an act that cannot be legalized.
Thank you.
Any other questions on that? Okay, I'll turn it back to Nicole.
We'll come back to it, I'm sure.
Thank you, Stephanie. Great question, Commissioner. So diving into the role of the board during today's hearing process, your role is to determine the feasibility of the proposal and if it should move forward to that ballot initiative. So there are essentially 3 main criteria that come from statute and case law. And I'll go into these in detail, but again, there's much more detail in the staff report. So the first criteria relates to whether or not the tax rate can support the services proposed by the petitioner. So in this case, the petitioner is proposing to provide planning, building, permitting, road maintenance, and have a city employee on day 0 or immediately following incorporation. They seek to establish a fire protection district within 10 years. And in the 15 to 30-year long-term plan, there are some additional services like garbage, parks and rec, water, sewer, etc. The petitioner has proposed a tax rate of $2 per thousand of assessed value. In the materials, the petitioner estimated that would lead to approximately $30,000 in revenue, but staff in utilizing our GIS resources for assessed value of property in the boundary estimates a revenue of $17,600 or so. We also wanted to note that in the record, the road department submitted a comment letter and noted that the cost to maintain only county roads in the boundary on average costs $262,000. So with that, staff has significant concerns regarding the proposed tax rate, the budget, and the ability to provide these services. And again, that's outlined in greater detail in the staff report. The second criteria relates to whether or not the city could reasonably comply with land use goals and also the county's comprehensive plan, land use goals, and implementing ordinances. And that would typically need to be done within 4 years of incorporating. Staff and agencies, those include Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Bureau of Land Management, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, Oregon Water Resources Department, and DLCD have cited concerns in the record that the city will not be able to meet this requirement. This area in particular, to cite a few of these concerns, is in significant sage grouse habitat, which requires extensive mitigation and disturbance caps for development. There's also concern about water availability in the boundary. Well depths continue to require more expensive, deeper wells. There's very limited ability for a water right, in particular municipal water right. So there are some concerns about access to water. There could be significant gaps in fire protection if the city to incorporate, which is one of our state land use goals, which relates to natural hazards. And specifically, the Bureau of Land Management noted that if a city were to incorporate, they would not be able to assist with fire ignitions on private land in the incorporated area until a city were to enter into a mutual aid agreement, which does require a fire department. So it just shows that if a fire department is going to be established within 10 years, that's the amount of time it would take to enter into this mutual aid agreement. So in the interim, there could be a gap in fire protection. Last, staff wanted to note that there is some complication with the current zoning of property in the boundary being primarily farm and forest zones. The process to rezone that land to, say, an urban zone like a residential district requires pretty extensive legal analysis. So staff is concerned about the resources available in order to undertake a lot of that analysis to effectively rezone that land for urbanization or city uses. The last criterion relates to the benefit to properties from incorporation. So the statute notes that all property that can be benefited should be included in the boundary. And if a property is not benefited, it should be excluded from the boundary. The term benefited is not explicitly defined, but staff defines it as generally if there's an immediate or long-term advantage from a property being located in a city limits. So for example, the city of La Pine, when they incorporated, they were already an urban unincorporated community. So that was allowed through Oregon law as a very specific footprint. They had some mixed use zoning, some public facilities already in place, but there was a limitation to growth of an already pretty dense area. By incorporating, they were able to go to greater density, have more access to services like water, sewer, etc. Staff and agencies have concerns regarding benefit to properties in the boundary. We'll note that, again, 75% of property in the boundary is federally owned and designated for conservation, meaning that it's not eligible for sale, transfer, or donation. So this land, if incorporated, would not be able to be developed. It would essentially remain as is, which could pose some challenges to private development as private land and public land are so intermixed in the boundary. Staff also has concerns with the large footprint of the boundary about some challenges to utilities or infrastructure. As it is such a large footprint, it would likely be difficult to establish a water sewer system and bring utilities to properties for development purposes. Staff does note, and we wanted to clarify this, this is in addition to the staff report, but wanted to make this point. The Milliken parcel, it's one parcel, is currently zoned rural service center, and that's the parcel that contains the post office and previously the gas station. That could potentially be benefited. It is already a commercial use. It could potentially expand, but staff notes that there's an issue with only selecting that one parcel as being benefited because it wouldn't meet that 150 person requirement to incorporate. With that, staff, our formal recommendation is denial of this petition to incorporate based on the extensive findings in the staff report. At the end of the hearing, following testimony from the petitioner, agencies, and public comment, as well as rebuttal, the board has 4 options today. You could continue the hearing to a date and time certain, close the hearing and leave the written record open, close the hearing and set a date for deliberations, or close the hearing and commence deliberations. And with that, that concludes my staff report, and I welcome any questions. Thank you.
Nicole, you mentioned that Milliken is designated, is zoned as a rural service center. Can you give us examples of other rural service centers around the county?
Sure, yes. I believe the Alfalfa store is zoned rural service center. I believe there's also, is it Whistle Stop is zoned rural service center? So we have a couple of these existing areas of the county that were, along a rail line or along a highway, in which you have extremely rural uses, but this was essentially a pre-existing pre-1970s commercial, property.
It's a hub. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And by contrast, when we look at places like Tumalo or Terrebonne, what is the zoning?
Yeah, so the official designation for that, it's an unincorporated community, specifically a rural community. So they have mixed use zoning, again, a pre-existing dense development pattern pre-1970 that was essentially defined in its existing footprint through statute in 1994 to ensure that that area didn't grow beyond its pre-existing boundary. But typically those boundaries have a different designation because of the mixed use zoning and the size.
on the parcelization, the plat of Terrebonne, the plat of Tumalo was a lot of small property residential envisioning from 150 years ago.
So these are examples of other places that are also not incorporated cities, but have a pattern of commercial, commercial development and a rural service center at the heart of it.
Any other questions? So this is the beginning of the process. Thank you very much, Nicole, for that. This is the public hearing, and we are going to follow the procedures that were outlined. So at this time, the petitioner has the opportunity for the floor to explain the big picture and the application. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So following the petitioner, there will be agency, if there's agency comments in the record, if there's any agency comment during this for testimony, that'll be the opportunity. And then people in support and in opposition. I have blue pages. If anybody's in the room or online, it'll just be a hand raise feature. Please fill out the blue form to provide testimony.
I am trying to figure out.
While we're setting up, I mean, I think it is helpful following Nicole's presentation for us to all just recall that, our job here today is to evaluate these three criteria. Whether the proposed boundary correctly includes all lands that would be benefited from being in the proposed city, whether the taxation rate will support the proposed services, and whether the proposed city can and will be able to comply with relevant statewide planning goals, county comprehensive plan goals and policies, and implementing ordinances. So I imagine we're going to hear a lot of arguments for and against incorporation, but just to emphasize to everyone here today, our job is to evaluate on these three criteria.
Zoom. I'm trying to share screen.
And then do you have it through, is it a web browser?
It's on my Safari.
Chair, is this for 40 minutes then at this original presentation?
I practiced.
45 was the number we had
Okay, 45.
proposed. Yep. Now we're working with the technology.
Yeah, sorry, commissioners, one moment.
So it's a slide presentation to be shared is what we're working on here.
So you have to, so essentially you have to allow Zoom to like.
Yes.
Okay, let's use the flash drive and make it run it. I'll run it for you.
Okay.
We're going to put it on our county presentation machine with the flash drive and display the slides. Please hand it to the secretariat here. Want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is an interesting process. We don't discuss creating a new city in the state of Oregon very much.
Is it appropriate for a person out here in the audience to ask a question?
So this is a public hearing on a microphone. So what you can do is to say, please come join us, put a blue form together and come up. Yep. Okay. So that's where, when you come up to the microphone. And we live in a new world where everything is video and audio recorded and can be remotely accessed. So there may be people following this, from the comfort of their own home. And we want it to be on the microphone, as I say.
Can a person get a list of who's sitting in?
I think we don't really do that in real time. I mean, after the fact, maybe you can see who was logged in. Good question, though. Let's check on that one. So,
But to the extent that they make a comment, if any of those people have signed up to make or raise their hand to make a comment, they'll have to identify themselves.
oh yeah, so anybody that participates will identify themselves.
Sorry for the difficulties.
And then we can eject it, then we can plug it into our computer and she can share.
DLCC provided that yesterday, and it.
So we're just working with the technology at this point to get a PowerPoint presentation up if anybody's following remotely. So it says we have 31 participants on the video call at this time.
You should be able to just. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's good. And I guess.
Okay, so we have successfully transferred the document to the floppy. Because it's not going to be displayed through the normal share screen option in Zoom. Some of the formatting may be a little weird, but the concept will be there.
Sure.
Andrew, do we have the paper presentation then of your,
Correct. So
Okay.
because of the formalities with my time limit, that one takes me about 2 hours to go through. The version you're going to see today is the condensed version.
okay,
Okay, we'll start with an introduction. We'll get going here.
All right, for the record, my name is Andrew Austin, Dr. Andrew Austin. I am a Deschutes County resident as well as a Mountain View landowner, currently Milliken.
Speak loud for the mic. You don't need to get
27898
close
Ford
to it.
Road.
Yeah.
You can pull it closer to you too.
So I will go ahead and get started for time constraint purposes. So this is the petition to incorporate a city or a town of Mountain View. The screen above shows the petition signature page. So in today's presentation, I'm going to go through a brief history of the area, the why, the boundary, the proposed tax rate as a requirement for the circulation of the petition, and the case from Thousand Friends of Oregon versus Wasco County.
We move that timer off the screen. It's on a small box in the top right also.
Which will then go into statewide planning goals to ensure compliance, and this information is derived from state code and DLCD. Ordinances in operation, a recap, and then we'll come back for the rebuttal. Oh, so tiny. So as far as brief history is concerned, way back post Ice Age, this area was once the location for an ancient lake bed. Some believe that the lake may still exist underground, and for millennia, indigenous people used the area for hunting, gathering, and fishing among their trade journeys. So the story of Milliken began in the 1880s when George Milliken established his ranch outside of Bend. And by 1913, it had grown enough to warrant its own post office, officially making it its own town. During the early 1900s through the 1930s, the area had what could be accounted to 100 to 200 different home sites and settlements, including the original Milliken homestead, which lied between my neighbor's property and mine. In the 1930s, the landscape was drastically altered when the Highway 20 cut through, and thus causing most of the residents to move westward. And by 1942, with the declining population, unfortunately, the post office closed its doors. Between 1942 and today, the population has gone from approximately 0 to where we're at today at over 160 residents. I mean, so we've seen a unique circumstance here of several hundred to nobody to back to around 160. So the vision and the purpose of incorporation was brought forward through community participation, and the petition was born. Its purpose is to address necessary services and realign the area with its current social and economic trends.
Maybe hit escape.
Next one.
Yeah. There you go.
Back to the vision and purpose. The intention behind the petition is not to form an extensive urban city, such as Bend or Portland. The petition aims to establish a comprehensive legal framework for an incorporated community or town. Looking at the information above, you have the smallest via population size for incorporated communities in Oregon, and then you have the official incorporated cities in Deschutes County, and this information was derived from the U.S. Bureau of Census, held by the Portland State Census Bureau. Data for the petition was gathered additionally from communication with incorporated cities that have a similar population threshold of 200 or less. Cities of that similar population size warranted that with 0 to 1 employee, they were able to accomplish the following tasks set out. And this generally reflected the complexities involved with their workloads after incorporating. So we'll move on to the why. Except for a small private volunteer organization, fire does not exist in the area. The absence of the adequate fire protection services really brings risks to various sectors, including public and community safety, with life involved, property involved, and increased liability as well to the local community and to the county as a whole. As far as medical coverage currently is concerned, on average, the current response time for medical services via ambulance is within 45 to 60 minutes. And this impacts the residents of the area, visitors to the area, recreational users on Pine Mountain and through the OHV trails, and highway travelers. Data also indicates that a slower response time generally correlates to a smaller survival rate, which brings us to the next slide. This is an example of those statistics, and this was from Dark Horse Emergency Services that provided that. On a personal account, I had a car fire in November of last year. I parked my car, 10 minutes later, it exploded in my driveway. Had this emergency happened in the summer or the fall, the entire community would have been at risk. Ben could have been at risk. I called 911 10 times, and the end result was no fire, medical, or police service that responded to my emergency. I was told to use a fire extinguisher or a hose. Moving on to local government and community. Local government would mean a focus on community-oriented development and the establishment of a more practical implementation for said government and timelines. Empowerment through community-driven change means that you enable local voices to initiate local actions. As far as zoning and land use, as time has progressed in the area and needs have changed, the community has evolved, necessitating a reevaluation of zoning and a realignment. The realignment would address the prevailing agricultural practices, which have grown progressively less sustainable and financially viable due to factors such as soil quality, the impacts of climate change, and the escalating operational expenses that we see. These escalating changes have also escalated demand for both residential and commercial development within the region. And this has been propelled by the pressing issue of unaffordable housing and affordable housing, not only at the county level, but also at the broader state and national context. This demand is bolstered by the community's expressed interest in exploring non-agricultural utilization options, such as general amenities, recreational facilities, and tourism. So some of the legal framework, what areas are eligible for incorporation, touched on this a little bit prior. The area intended for incorporation should be entirely situated within a designated rural unincorporated community and contiguous lands. In essence, as of today's standards, because most of these communities have already been incorporated, you're left with primarily agricultural or forest lands. Our neighboring areas, Hampton and Brothers, have almost exact replicas of the current Milliken zoning, which you see EFU primarily, some subsurface mining, and then you have your commercial designation in all of these areas. As you are well aware, the Oregon Supreme Court held that your determination of what areas may be benefited is quasi-judicial and is not legislative. As such, the governor's body is acting as an impartial decision maker. I would like to note that the Supreme Court held the decision regarding what area may be benefited, and they did not make their determination on tax rate or if a city could and should or would comply with statewide planning goals, and that is more relevant to the Thousand Friends of Oregon versus Wasco County. The county commission may alter the boundaries of the proposed city to add all territory that may be benefited, and the county commission may not determine that no part of the proposed area would be benefited to avoid an election. And that was brought on by that case. So determination criteria. Could you fix that again for me? You are already well aware of what we are determining today, whether the proposed boundary could correctly include all lands, the proposed tax rate, which is a petition circulation requirement, and the case of Thousand Friends of Oregon versus Wasco County. And this is correlated via CDD as to whether we can comply with statewide planning goals at the state and county level. So determining whether the boundary is correct, a multitude of factors were considered, including demographics, land use, which more closely correlates to current uses and what is needed, as well as allowing enough room for comprehensive planning with the appropriate chapters. As far as the boundary map is considered, the proposed area is the historical grazing area for George Milliken. It was done through thoughtful deliberation that would encompass all lands that could potentially benefit. And if you look at that map, notably Deschutes County holds the majority of individual tax lots within the boundary. Additionally, a substantial area is necessary to ensure adherence to statewide planning objectives. This would allow for the correct zoning allocation that accounts for anticipated growth. And this is further strengthened from OR's chapters again. There's been a lot of debate and questions on why I added the second map, and the boundary adjustments proposed and brought forward to CDD and the board were merely a suggestion and do not constitute an official amendment to the petition. Because you are allowed to disclude lands and change the boundary, I thought this would be a good thing to highlight. So favorable adjustments on that proposed map include modification of the envisioned western boundary by shifting it eastward. This ensures that inclusivity of lands could drive advantages from incorporation. And this opting for an eastern boundary adjustment maintains a relatively constant balance in social and economic conditions. So the area to the west has the lowest approval rate for the petition. These individuals are generally more affluent and have access to the Alfalfa Volunteer Fire Station. And then, as we all know, the forest wouldn't benefit from incorporating legally per se, as it would continue its current rights. When we were considering boundary, also we're careful to consider the population. The statistics were gathered from the PSU Census Bureau, who holds the records from latest census data collection. And if you go through multiple of their mapping services that they provide, you can count individually how many residents are in the area. My data from visiting all of these inhabited population areas In other words, I went to every single tax lot in the area and tallied how many people were in the homes. I established over 200. Land use, following the incorporation, comprehensive planning would commence, ensuring that we meet the metrics for goal 1. Incorporating enables the community to add needed services, and that is why services were taken into account. And then natural resources. There's been no plan to include BLM land as far into development, but because they have to be connected lands, they were included in the proposal. And I feel like this could just ensure their survival and preservation long term. And then community support. So a desire for local government and self-determination was determined. Incorporating would empower the community to make decisions. As I said before, a majority of my surveyed participants are residents of the area. And in the final stages, they were all registered voters. Future growth means anticipating for future growth and demands that may happen on the area. So as far as analyzing the boundary, Mountain View's proposed boundary is a product of careful consideration and effectively fulfills the following criteria. It reflects the community's inclinations, taking into consideration the aspirations and options of residents, including those with voting privileges, while we recognize that a complete census may not be obtainable. It also addresses the impact of catering to both existing and forthcoming infrastructure and service demands. And it aligns harmoniously with the comprehensive planning and zoning requirement. Through all of this, we can demonstrate the flexibility and need for accommodating expansion if deemed necessary in the future. So this is a very loosely put proposed or example of what an urban growth boundary could look like in the area. The statistics you see forth have already been mentioned. Importantly, legally, an urban growth boundary does not have to precisely mirror the boundary of the city. Generally, cities and counties use the area outside for urban and rural reserves. We're going to move on to the tax rate. The proposed rate of $2 per thousand assessed value on real property can support the newly incorporated city. The assessment considered the current property assessment for rural Deschutes County, and we made sure to exclude federally held land. These projections were taken from the 21 and 22 reports publicly available and use basic math. I know that CDD has different numbers, so we made sure to include those figures. I don't know if it shows on this one. But even at the 58%, which was the stated income by CDD, we can still meet the minimum operating expenses required to operate the city as part of the petition requirement. The next bullet point outlines what traditional cities of our size pay for. And that determination came to $17,250. Notably, 10,000 of that, I believe, was for meeting space. And we have concluded through looking at public meeting law that can be significantly reduced, and I'll explain that later. So I would also like to highlight that this is not the total city revenue possible, and that this is just income provided by property taxes. It's also crucial to emphasize that the feasibility statement is intended to bolster the capacity to fund and deliver services, serving as an example, and this is not a fixed plan. The incoming city government, once elected, would formulate official plans and policies informed by updated income and budget analysis. This applies to all elements within my petition, from the 0 to 3 all the way to the 20+ year proposals. Following its successful incorporation, the city's population would be certified by Portland State Census Bureau. This is outlined in the League of Oregon Cities. The 150 person threshold, as my clarification with League of Oregon Cities, was established to circulate the petition, which was part of the 221 that Stephanie mentioned. After the city's population is certified, state shared cigarette, liquor, and gas taxes would automatically be distributed on a per capita basis in monthly installments. The amount of the current allocation is available from the League of Oregon Cities and is updated. Beginning in its 4th year, a city would be required in a county of 100,000 or more, which we are, to provide at least 4 of the following services to be continue eligibility for those funds. And they include everything from police, fire protection, maintaining sewers, street lights, planning, and you can see other examples. The new city is automatically considered to be providing by state law 4 or more services until they reach that 4th year. And that, is why those figures were added to the year 1 and year 3 fiscal breakdowns. Included in the budget are subsets of income that include, but are not limited to, the state shared revenue, which we already covered pretty much syntax in layman terms. This is a screenshot of the proposed city tax in totality with all other taxes collected normally in this region. And it gives you a good idea of what services are currently provided and what would continue, as well as what other local incorporated communities pay, such as Bend and Redmond. Notably, the county rural law enforcement versus the proposed tax rate is a 58 cents difference. As far as the additional income opportunities, and it has been stressed that you shouldn't rely on these primarily, but they are definitely obtainable. There's over $1 billion available through grant purposes and loans for small cities to utilize as of 2023 that could significantly increase the city budget. A few of the available sources, and I highlighted some of the subsets that have the most money allocated, are the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which has a lot of available grants and can be utilized for anything from the development of essential community facilities to connecting farmers to local markets. There are also resources available through the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and those are highlighted there, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. A lot of these have to do with development of infrastructure, economic development, and ensuring that you have funding necessary to implement hazard mitigation plans as required. There are also funds available through the U.S. Department of Transportation, which would ensure transportation needs are met for transportation planning and development. And the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has several available for municipal water projects. I'd like to emphasize that the estimates outlined in my petition are deliberately conservative, taking into account the availability of funding. It's also important to note that grants and funds are not accessible in this capacity to individuals such as myself, and are only available once you have the legal definition of a city. So they would be obtainable after successful incorporation. Moreover, it's crucial to understand that because they're time sensitive and subject to availability, picking out grants and naming them in the petition was not feasible, but it was prudent out of the billions of dollars to have a conservative estimate to add into the budget. So as a general recap, you can see that the prospective city has a rather large potential for additional income. The conservative estimates show development and healthy reserves can be established within the first few years. And as a requirement to circulate the petition, the minimum expenses can be paid.
Dr. Hassan, you mentioned earlier, or you referred earlier to some of the other very small cities in the state of Oregon. Do you have a sense of the track record of those cities in securing some of the federal funding programs that you've described today?
At this point, most of those communities are pretty stagnant or losing population, so they're not applying for a lot of those grants for development purposes, as they've met their comprehensive planning goals and they've been accepted. I can say from personal experience that working with legal government organizations of small sizes, such as the Deschutes Soil and Water Conservation District, we have one grant writer that was able to secure almost $1 million of funding this year.
Yeah, I just wanted to share. I've had a significant experience in my life working with small cities to secure those very federal grant programs, and I could pretty confidently say that cities of the scale that you're talking about in terms of population do not have the capacity to pursue those grants and then administer and implement those grants when they become, when they're awarded. I mean, we're talking the cities that have the capacity to pursue those grants and administer them are I don't want to say they're big, but they are substantially larger than cities like Antelope or Shaniko.
I appreciate that perspective on the situation. I made sure to include ones that were obtainable for very small population sizes that would really are really there to help with the development, the seeded aspect of a city.
Yeah, no, eligibility is one thing. And very small communities are eligible, but whether they have the wherewithal to be able to actually research, apply for, administer, and implement a grant project is another question.
So we're going to move on to number 3, whether the proposed city can and will be able to comply with the relevant statewide planning goals. So the nonprofit organization Thousand Friends of Oregon challenged Wasco County's court decision and approval of their comprehensive plan because the organization felt like it did not comply with Oregon statewide planning goals. The court held that the plan did not adequately address the preservation of agricultural and forest lands. So to highlight this, LUBA went on to say that because the incorporation was subject to rural lands, they did not feel like that would prohibit incorporation altogether. The main takeaway from this case was that because the court determined eligibility for the city to go to the ballot, they should have also included an exemption to goal 14 related to goal 3 and 4. And because they did not do that, they were not in compliance with goal 3 or 4. Additionally, the county court made an official record statement that said our decision to allow Dakota ballot does not constitute development of urban services within the unincorporated area, which was a contradiction to the findings that they believed warranted incorporation in and of itself. So upon careful examination of the previous case, it becomes apparent that the effective and accurate implementation of statewide planning goals holds paramount significance. It's also equally evident that sustaining compliance with these statewide planning goals without a comprehensive plan is not entirely feasible, further compounded by the current legal status of an incorporated city, which generally renders the creation of an official comprehensive plan not feasible at this juncture, and becomes a lot more obtainable and successful once incorporation happens. However, it is worth noting that while a comprehensive plan may not be feasible at this time, demonstration of understanding of the statewide planning goals and a commitment to adhering to them can be established. Adherence would generally be followed through and governed by ORS and OAR statutes, which are in place to enforce all aspects of statewide planning goals. And Mountain View would be held to them in the same way that Bend or any other government would be held to them. It should also be noted that if a substantial, and I highlighted substantial because this was mentioned in the findings report, portion to this petition was required by state law, it would be in the statutes and written in the same manner that the determination for the boundaries outlined, where they have strict guidelines of what you need to include in order to get your map in the petition. It would also be highlighted, and there would be instructions from the LOC white paper, which is generally in how this entire petition was formed. So Mountain View will be sure that goals 1 through 14 in Oregon's statewide land use planning are implemented and carried forth and developed throughout the comprehensive plan. I would like to note that 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19 are not entirely applicable to our region, but they will be included in the comprehensive planning. DLCD works with cities and counties to evaluate their unique planning and development needs and develop periodic work review programs to meet those needs. Once the city's work program is approved, the city would submit its plans for review then the Department of LCDC would help with that. Historically, DLCD has provided funds for a portion of the planning effort, and Mountain View would apply for those as well as other available grants mentioned in the budget section. I would also like to highlight that budget section, I think we would be here all day if I went through every grant opportunity. Small cities have generally contracted with the county, local governments, or private consulting firms to prepare their comprehensive plans. And Mountain View will seek assistance from all three. We will also ensure appropriate compensation is made to these entities, as I understand that is a concern that has been raised and discussed. So our commitment would be the city would prepare and adopt a comprehensive plan consistent with statewide planning goals and adopted by the Oregon Land Conservation and Development Commission. To achieve this, Mountain View's newly elected council would work with LCDC administrative staff to ensure adoption of a comprehensive plan for the new city and ensuring its compliance with the appropriate chapters. The plan would be communicated with the county and acknowledged by LCDC before it was made official. Because of the limited population and scope of the requirements set forth by ORS for our comprehensive plan, ours would not most likely be as complex as that required by Bend. And there's a statute that kind of outlines that the proposed city must plan for the residential development at or above the urban density planned for an existing city within the county that has a similar population or urban growth boundary. This just highlights some of the aspects from the state of Oregon's page. Mountain View anticipates at least a year, but not more than 4 years to adopt their plan. And those requirements are outlined in that ORS. While creating the program, the council or governing body will use the foundation of the statewide program for land use planning in Oregon as a guideline for developing the plan. The goals expressed in the state's policies on land use and related topics like citizen involvement, housing, and natural resources would be implemented throughout the entire plan. I would like to note that these goals are also associated with suggestions, and I took a screenshot from the state's webpage just to further demonstrate that. And the suggestions are not mandatory, though the ORS is pertaining to each are. So when CDD brought forth the third question, it really made me ponder, how can we show compliance? So I reached out to DLCD and asked them directly, how do I show compliance with statewide planning goals? That was a long time ago now. And since they have responded as of yesterday with further information, and we have developed a plan for that as well. But the highlight there was ensuring compliance can be attributed to following the correct ORS chapters. The ones in bold are heavily relevant before a comprehensive plan is adopted. And that includes making sure that your comprehensive plan and land use, any decisions in regards to land use, meet the goals before your plan is adopted, and making sure that any limited decisions in regards to amended portions also meet the goals. It further outlines once your comprehensive plan is established and how to carry forth. So after my discussions with the LCD yesterday, I feel like a lot of their letter highlighted information that's already in the presentation, but I thought it was necessary to kind of very simply outline other ways to make sure that you're holding true to statewide planning goals. And the first step is by assessing the need for urban services, which is a requirement in and of itself to take an exemption or to establish urban growth boundary. And so the petition itself generally lays legal merit for the need for urban services. Step 2 is leveraging state law for appropriate exemptions. And as I mentioned prior, the statewide planning goals and the 1,000 Friends of Oregon versus Wascott County generally came down to the fact that the court should have made an exemption to Goal 14 pertaining to Goal 3 for legality purposes. And had that been done, there wouldn't really have been merit for the case itself. Also, these exemptions can be closely related to similar attributes and information that you could use in a conditional use application to build on EFU lands. And these are also related to Goal 2. Utilizing state laws to identify and implement exemptions when establishing the urban growth boundary is important while considering various factors such as the soil quality, the number of existing farming operations in relation to other land uses, what the current economic and social trends are in the area. And this includes the number of vacation cabins and residential cabins and the need for urban services. It's also important to understand that these factors allow us to make legal exemptions using Part 2 of Goal 2, which provides a purpose that a local government can follow and process to taking an exemption. Step 3 is designing the urban growth boundary and making sure that it is adequate. When designing the urban growth boundary, it's important that it provides adequate space to accommodate both current and long-term urban growth. Also, making sure that the plan encompasses urban density with appropriate lot sizes for all zoning types. So this would prevent urban sprawl, in other words, and you would focus your development within the urban growth boundary, making sure that you have a focus on density-based development. This approach ensures that utilizing applicable Oregon revised statutes and Oregon administrative rules are done to establish a solid foundation for the comprehensive plan and ensures legal compliance. Step 3A would be adopting current zoning and ordinances outside the urban growth boundary to ease and facilitate the process with the comprehensive plan. A straightforward adoption approach of current zoning and ordinances outside of our urban growth boundary would really help facilitate and streamline that process. And these have already been established from CDD in the county itself. Step 4 would be kind of an overall analysis of infrastructure and your resources. This step is moreover triggered through population threshold metrics, and a lot of these, such as transportation, municipal services, and so forth, are required once you reach a population of 2,500 or more. It's important to take into account the long-term services required, such as water, sewer, and utilities when developing your urban growth boundary, while considering all aspects of your carrying capacity. And this means that in an area such as ours, you would have a heavy utilization toward technological advances to ensure that you are not depleting those resources. And I highlight at the very end technologies available to not deplete these resources. By focusing on these enhanced steps and considering these factors, you can make sure that your urban growth boundary would be comprehensive, legally compliant, and sustainable for long-term growth. The steps also, even though heavily simplified, ensure compliance with statewide planning goals and future showcase the ability for Mountain View to do them successfully. So given the state's requirement of no municipal services, generally until you reach a 2,500 or more population threshold, as I said before, our comprehensive plan can initially be relatively straightforward. However, we are committed to building a well thought out plan set as the groundwork for future growth while prioritizing essential services as our population threshold reaches those metrics. Also, by upholding Oregon statewide planning goals, especially in regards to meeting the incorporation requirements and involving community throughout the process. Our incorporation aims to create a well-balanced and resilient community that fosters economic development and environmental stewardship and an enhanced quality of life for all residents now and through the future. As mentioned previously, the incorporation of an existing policies and planning initiatives outside of our urban growth boundary, which have already been established and implemented by the county, would further facilitate the comprehensive planning and implementation process by just using a straightforward adoption of these principles. So as I mentioned earlier, I would touch on how you may lessen the cost burden in the minimum operating expenses. And one of the biggest takeaways was the public meeting space. And upon careful legal review, it was paramount to highlight that public meetings can be held on private land, which can generally have a no cost variance to the city as long as they follow these state mandates in regards to public meetings, and that there are also electronic or digital means that you can legally hold these meetings too. And so just ensuring that the bold point, accessibility, the proper notice, recording, and total compliance is met would really help facilitate this metric. So getting into more of the legal framework and ordinances, ORS sets out and allows but does not require the appointment of a city planning commission. After successfully incorporating the newly elected city council would decide whether the city's governing body would also serve as the planning commission, or if the city would create a planning commission following the appropriate chapters that includes all requirements for the occupational makeup of said commission. The council will also appoint a budget officer after the citizen members of the budget committee are also nominated. So the budget committee would be composed of the governing body and an equal number of citizens as required. If successful incorporation were to happen, 5 initial city council members would be elected after the incorporation, and they would have to take office within 10 days of the county commission proclamation for the election results. Once the city is legally incorporated, those ORS chapters provide the legal basis for a city council to conduct decisions until voters would adopt a home charter.
Do you have an estimate now about getting to the end of this presentation?
Yes, we're near the end.
Uh,
Am I past my time?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm very close to the end.
yeah, let's wrap it up and we'll get there. Yeah, go ahead and keep the presentation up and yeah, we'll go from there.
I don't think I accounted for the questions in the middle as far as timing is concerned. The next slide just kind of lays out Oregon charters that you can follow and adopt to make sure. I wanted to highlight the city of Trenton versus New Jersey, where the court determined that a municipality merely is a department of the state, and the state may withhold, grant, or withdraw powers and privileges as it sees fit. However, great or small its sphere of action, it maintains the creature of it maintains it as the body of the creature of the state, and upholding these powers and privileges as seem necessary. So a review. So we're at the end. The proposed city of Mountain View takes into account and satisfies the community's preference, potential for growth, and the need to address current, future infrastructure. It also ensures that minimum operating expenses would be paid per ORS chapters to circulate. And it has a large potential for additional income within the first few years. The incorporation process makes sure that we adhere to requirements set forth in the administrative rules. And we can take valuable lessons from the Thousand Rivers of Oregon versus Wascott County. You already know, I just wanted to highlight that portion. So I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. So yeah, we have some time. We're going to get some other testimony and you'll be able to come back for rebuttal for more information.
Do have a couple of questions and we're allowed to, you're allowed to stay there for a couple more minutes to answer questions. I would start by saying that one of the things I think is most intriguing about this proposal is the opportunity to enhance services for residents in the area that we're talking about. Two that you mentioned that are of particular interest to me are fire and EMS and rural patrol services. And there was a couple things, I had a couple of questions based on your presentation that things I wanted to clarify so that we understand what we're talking about here. The first question is, are you aware, or can you describe for us where current rural fire districts boundaries lie in relation to your proposed city boundary?
So for official fire boundary, only a small northwestern portion of the boundary line has fire protection.
Under which districts?
Under Alfalfa.
Where does the Deschutes County Rural Fire Protection District number 2 boundary come to?
I believe that boundary is in an uninhabited portion, and then the Alfalfa portion cuts in here. You can join a private organization which is based out of Brothers in case there's a fire out here. But you have a water truck and volunteers running that operation, and that did not seem to be proven helpful when I had my car fire.
Right. Yeah. So are you officially within the boundaries of the Brothers Rural Fire Protection Association service area?
No. So that the one I mentioned is a private organization that you can pay for, and their volunteers do their best to help with fires.
Right. Yeah. And these rural fire protection associations are being formed all over the state in areas where the population density is too low to support the formation of a fire district. Yeah. So just kind of to clarify for folks that access to enhanced fire protection in very remote rural areas is most commonly accomplished through joining rural fire protection associations right now. Incorporating a city is an opportunity to get better rural fire protection, but you will have to pay. There's a substantial assessment associated with creating a fire protection district, and $17,000 a year is not going to get you a whole lot of fire protection, with considering the other responsibilities associated with a city. So the other, I wanted to ask about rural patrol as well, and so as you probably know, the Deschutes County Sheriff's Office operates off of two taxing districts, one countywide and one that is only for rural patrol, the rural portions of the county. I'm curious whether incorporation of this area would then bump the city or the urban growth boundary out of the rural taxing district for the sheriff's office, and in which case the question would be, how would you plan to essentially compensate for that loss of tax revenue to support law enforcement?
So as you can see through the budget analysis, we're not attributing that rural income into our budget for those services. And I know they're kind of heavily drawn out generally until we come up with our own fire district or plan, police district or plan. We would contract through appropriate agencies for said services.
Right. But if
you mentioned the limits with the $17,620 or $30,000 as I projected to establish these services, and that's why I highly emphasize that. As you are well aware, property tax is not our only income.
Yes. So do you have an answer to that question of whether incorporation would bump a certain area of what we're talking about out of the rural taxing district for the sheriff's office? Because essentially that means reduced revenue to provide patrols, and if your proposed city followed the examples of other smaller cities in our county, city of La Pine, city of Sisters, basically you'd be contracting back to the sheriff's office to provide those services, but without the benefit of the tax base that being unincorporated in this case provides.
I believe that once the successful bonds have been paid for in relation to any police services, that would come down to the willingness for that department to continue serving. So in essence, we would have to contract. But if there are any bonds currently in place that in any regards to rural services, those would have to continue legally until the bond is satisfied.
So I can weigh in here. The city of La Pine incorporated after that permanent rate was put in place for rural patrol. And so the residents of the city of La Pine do pay that rural patrol rate for public safety at the sheriff's office. So it hasn't been removed from the tax bills of the incorporated area of the city of La Pine. So, if the proposal included removing them, that would be an action you'd have to build into a vote. And I don't even know if it's legal or not, but yeah.
Do we know for Sisters whether they
Sisters was incorporated in the 50s, so they were in place and they're not paying it, but the contracts are very different between the Sisters and La Pine. Sisters is a lot larger because it's for patrol services and presence. La Pine has a contract, but it's only enhancing because of the urban area.
And so Sisters is making up for it in direct taxation on the city's assessment.
That's correct.
And then contracting to us.
They contract.
Yeah, and I would like to highlight that police services were never mentioned as a primary focus or concern for our area.
Okay. We're going to get to some other testimony and we'll come back. So at this time, agency comments. So we do have agency comments in the record, multiple letters written in. I want to thank the agencies for providing that. Is there any other agency comments specifically either in the room or online? Okay, there's somebody attending online, raised hand feature. Please join us. I'm not sure who that is yet, but we'll find out together. So I see we're down to 22 participants. We were at 31 previously. Thank you for the people that have followed.
So Chair DeBone, I'm not sure. I'm going to be joining the panelists here.
I have your audio. Yes. Thank you for joining us. So there we go. John Jennings, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Chair DeBone, members of the commission. I'm John Jennings. I'm the Community Services Specialist with the Department of Land Conservation Development. With us also is Kevin Young. I just see Kevin popping in. And what I'd like to do, if it's okay, I'd like to ask Kevin to speak. I think he's going to kind of go over some of the things in our letter. But then I also would like to say a few words if that's okay. So again, I'll ask your permission to kind of defer to Kevin. But then at some point, either following Kevin or before we end up, I would like to say a few things if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Just put it in perspective. So this is Department of Land Conservation and Development. You said you're a community specialist, and then Kevin, please take it away and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Chair DeBone, commissioners, and thanks for the introduction, John. Really appreciate the time today. I'm Kevin Young. I'm a senior urban planner with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. I just wanted to kind of provide a framework for, our kind of view of how this process should work under the applicable rules. So I think as has been mentioned, if the decision were to incorporate, the community would have up to 4 years to prepare and adopt and receive acknowledgement for a comprehensive plan that addresses all applicable statewide planning goals. I think the applicant outlined the applicable goals correctly. That is a big lift. It is a big lift for an area with very low population and limited resources. I think One of the considerations that we would have to apply here is to look at the proposed urban growth boundary area. And I think it's worth noting, it is a very large area. Presumably, if incorporation is the plan, then the comprehensive plan should address, basically figure out how are we going to urbanize this entire area. And I believe it's written down here, 265 square miles in size, which is about 8 times the current urban growth boundary for the city of Bend. It is a huge area. The presumption of this whole process is that this area would be urbanized over time. One of the concerns that we have is in relation to existing population data, potential projections for growth in this area. We see nothing even remotely on the scale that would suggest urbanization of that area over time. In the interim, if the area were to incorporate, but not essentially be annexed into the city, because the city could not annex these lands in until the city actually established what are our zoning designations, what is our development code, what are permissible lot sizes, what infrastructure is available to serve them. That's a lot of work to figure out. So until that action happens, I think it's important to recognize that rural land use laws, wildlife protections that currently exist in these areas would continue to be applied, and they would need to continue to be applied even if this area is incorporated. So it would really continue to function as it does currently under existing rules and statutes. The other concern that we have, another concern we have at the department, is just looking at the information available on the carrying capacity of this area. I know the applicant has done a lot of work. I've reviewed those materials, but some of the basic, fundamentals about water supply, sanitary sewer, conceivably, we understand small cities don't necessarily have to put all that infrastructure in place immediately, but the presumption is that they would grow to a size where those facilities would be warranted. And we don't see a lot of demonstration that would be viable. And at this point, those are my comments. I'll go ahead and make some space for John to provide additional thoughts.
Thank you.
So thank you, Kevin. And again, Chair DeBonne, members of the commission, John Jennings, and I appreciate your time this morning. And I'm going to say a couple things, and some of them are observations. Some we're going to kind of follow up on what Kevin has pointed out. Obviously, DLC doesn't have a position on whether or not to approve or deny. We certainly do appreciate the interest in this area. I've been going through this area my whole life, and I think it's just beautiful out there. I've also had the privilege of working with many small cities over the course of my career as land use planner. I've been to Greenhorn. It's the highest town in Oregon. I've sat down with the good people of Granite. I represented Prescott up there in Columbia County earlier in my career. I've seen the Lone Rock at Lone Rock. So I really have enjoyed working with these small cities, and I've observed they have a number of things in common. They have a relatively small area footprint in terms of their corporate city limits. They have no or very low amount of public land. They typically don't have any standing medical services or police protection. As I pointed out, that's largely a function of the county sheriff. Fire protection is generally a voluntary. They don't have designated wildlife habitats, but they do have typically an existing presence and purpose. They do have a semblance of a center. They do have a community identity, and they absolutely struggle. I mean, they all just absolutely struggle to remain relevant, to keep the lights on sometimes. They're proud people, obviously. There's a lot of pioneer spirit, but it's just tough. It's just really tough on these little guys. So I guess I'm going to kind of turn to a little bit of the maybe more relevant stuff here. And like I said, I don't know, the tax rate thing, and we're not testifying on that. But it is expensive. It's really expensive. Compliance with land use goals. We're not saying that that can't happen. But I will say I'm not certain at all that it would get them what they want. Right? As Kevin pointed out, lands that are not within an urban growth boundary, whether or not they're in incorporated territory, are rural lands. And to identify that urban growth boundary, that's based on a population forecast generally, and that's the potential for growth out there. Adding population is very limited. I mean, just I think from a fundamental standpoint, we're probably looking, dare I say it, we're probably looking at an urban growth boundary that would be limited to a portion of the 21 acres designated as a Milliken Rural Service Center. That's my forecasting, but based on the methodology and the legal arrangement, I suspect that's what we'd end up with. Rezoning lands beyond that, that's a tall order. Your staff has mentioned that, and you guys have been through that as commissioners. So I mean, I'm just not certain that that gets them is going to get them where they want to be. And the benefit to properties, again, that's not for me to decide. But again, the incorporation is a marathon, and it's not a sprint. And it's more like a gauntlet than a marathon. So I'm just going to close and say that, we do have concerns that there's immense, possibly overwhelming challenges to standing up a city like this, just standing up a town out of virtually nothing. We do believe that will demand your time, the county's time and money, as well as ours, to get this done. And that could come at the expense of other citizens, right, in other communities. And I just, we're really doubtful that it gets them what they want in the first place. I'll just close and say that we believe that the staff report and recommendation was well reasoned, and that we believe that it furnishes you the ability to make an informed decision. So I'm going to stop there and thank you very much. I'd be happy to answer any questions, but thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Joan, I was trying to write very fast when you were kind of giving some of the characteristics of other very small cities, but I maybe got a third of what you said. Could you go through that list again? Small land area, volunteer fire.
I'll give it my best shot. And bear in mind, I'm thinking of examples like Seneca and Fossil and Ukiah and Unity. I'm thinking of these small towns, and so first of all, the land base is kind of right sized, so to speak. So they don't have an immense amount of territory. It's pretty much that is that fits with the existing settlement pattern. That's another characteristic, right? That they have that existing presence and purpose. I think I use the word purpose, and identity, community identity. I mean, we've been through this. It's startling. It's almost startling how big and vast and empty this proposed boundary is. It is to me. It's beautiful, but there's not much out there. They don't tend to have services, official, staffed, funded services, medical or fire can be provided, but it's usually a volunteer fire district, if not rural fire protection district, or police, law enforcement, and they don't tend to have wildlife habitat, and largely that's because it's been settled. It's been occupied. Out here, as I pointed out, there's mule deer range and Rocky Mountain elk and pronghorn antelope and sage grouse. So the same things that the county's been going through with the Spencer Wells I always want to say Egypt wells. I think it's Spencer Wells, the quarry out there, the city would need to deal with. And again, as I pointed out, it's tough. It's tough on these small cities. It's tough financially. It's tough to maintain the participation for administrative and other types of stuff. So, Commissioner Chang, I apologize. I'm going to stop right there because I feel myself kind of go rambling on and on. But hopefully that kind of helps fill in the blanks.
Yeah, another question. So when I think about our existing cities, the core infrastructure of our existing cities was typically built a long time ago. This was an era when there was a lot of federal money for municipal infrastructure, which is not the case now. And so you think about the city of Bend, city of Sisters, Redmond. And I'm wondering about for these very small towns, I'm wondering if that actually is true as well, that many of these older, very small cities, the infrastructure was, the core infrastructure was probably built a long time ago. I'm wondering if they had good access to federal funds to build that infrastructure as well, or whether, because of their small size, they're different in some way. And where I'm getting at with this is my concern is if we have expectations of cities to provide core infrastructure, even if it's in a small urban growth boundary area, and these small cities don't have access to the kinds of ample federal funds that were once available for municipal infrastructure. How is it possible for a new incorporating city to create that infrastructure?
So thank you, Chair DeBonne and Commissioner Chang. That's the federal funding piece is a bit out of my wheelhouse, but I will offer some observations, and that is, it has been a challenge. I've seen these small communities consistently challenged. They have, in some cases, been successful. I'm thinking about the city of Spray. John Day on the John Day River did manage to come up with some improvements to their wastewater system. It took about a decade, to get that figured out, and that's with some absolutely imminent need. So I think that it's there are factors. The funding that led to and assisted in the development of this infrastructure decades ago isn't available now. To the extent that there is, it's limited. And investing in one place comes at the expense of being able to invest somewhere else. And when those places are limited in staff and capacity and the ability to actually administer and carry things out, if you don't have a public works director, if you don't have a city engineer, if you don't have or have to hire these things, again, it's an expensive process, and it's tough. It's tough for these small cities. Could it happen? I can't say it couldn't happen, but it typically these cities, and again, in my observation, my work, that have struggled with infrastructure and other things continue to struggle.
Thank you.
Oh, Mr. Jennings, it's Commissioner Adair, and I actually grew up in Heppner, and a lot of the cities you're mentioning are part of my circle. Spent time in Seneca, and I believe that it is blessed with the location of the Sylvies Golf Resort. And so we actually stayed in Seneca. It was quite nice. And then Ukiah has just brought back their annual rodeo, and I do believe that's been quite successful. So I think it's wonderful for the community, and I know they actually have a restaurant there. It's hard to find a restaurant when you're driving across. Just went through Spray recently, and there was nothing open that day, but there was nothing in Heppner either. So it's I do so appreciate though rural Eastern Oregon, and I do think that they have a lot of wealth for people traveling through our beautiful state.
So, Chairman Derek, or excuse me, Chairman DeBonne, Commissioner, I agree entirely. I love our rural communities and our small communities. You know, but like I said, it's not easy for them out there, and those good people are doing the best they can. And I'm thrilled to see the rodeo come back to Ukiah, and you know, I'd like to see the Seneca Tavern open back up, which I think it will. I'd love to see the restaurant in Paisley, the Homestead, come back, open back up after it burned down. I'd see it be rebuilt, but time will tell. So again, thank you so much. I agree entirely, and you know, appreciate your sentiment.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Is there any other agency comment, any other raised hand features on Zoom? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move to testimony in person. We're going to start with support. We do have neutral and undecided, and then opposition. So at this time, Mr. Fred Terry, please join us. So these will be 3-minute testimonies and sharing your thoughts. And you started out with the question earlier, so thanks for being patient.
The question earlier, I got answered by an attorney.
Okay.
That should be good for me. You're worrying about what will happen to this part of the country? If you open the door, it'll build so fast if you allow it and do it properly. You'll have people out here with money that you won't believe how fast it'll build. Is this mostly in Deschutes County? Is it all in Deschutes? Okay. The county needs to be involved in this big time, I would think. State police need to be involved. State firefighting needs to be involved. I don't know how far out the medical hospital goes, out 20, but it should go as far the distance, I would think. But that's just my personal opinion. We own Terry Lane area, 80 acres, surrounded by the wilderness, Badlands. If you walked out into that wilderness area, it was part of the dumping grounds of Bend in the old days. So it's not quite the wilderness you think it is, if you've been out there personally. So that needs to be improved. I don't know if the federal government needs to do that or what, but it's not a wilderness, in my opinion. It's a wildlife sanctuary. And there's a lot of unknowns in that country. There's underground lava tubes all over that country. And I have one big one under my property. I know that because I can witch water. I can witch that tube. It's 60 feet across in one place and over 300 feet across in another. So there's lots of opportunity out there, folks. And the people of Oregon and California and New York love this country of Central Oregon. And my great-grandfather came across on the wagon train to Oregon to establish a new country. And believe me, he's still alive in my heart. And that's all I have to say, I think.
Great. Thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
So
Maybe a question.
that was a statement in opposition?
Support.
Support, okay. Trying to be clear.
Okay, so as I say, we are calling for testimony. If anybody else wants to speak, please fill out the blue form. At this time, we have requests to speak by Ryan Loft, and Janice Fortier. And you can correct your names when you get up here. Sorry.
Hi, Your Honor, Ryan Lofty here.
And Janice Fortier, I'm his mother.
We've been going through a lot of procedures for the last time. Like for the last 4 years, I've been trying to build on this property. I have full allowances to build on this property. I'm allowed house on this dwelling, everything. I have easement rights, everything. You guys are not allowing me as a city to be able to build onto my property. I'm not able to get easements to get onto my property, even though it says this in my deeding rights. As of now, it would be great if Milliken could be a city, so then proceedings can actually go through for people that have land in this area to actually be able to do something with it. The city of Bend has locked Milliken down, is what they have done. And it has not been able to be built in 100 years. It's just pretty much just been shut down. And yes, it's only 20 minutes from Bend. This place is going to blow up if you allow people to do things. The money is there. I've had the money. I've been wanting to build. I've been held up.
I know we don't have very much time, but we lived here in the 90s and then he picked up this property. And in that time, this piece of property, I believe, was sold by the county to a lot of people, like $1 an acre. And we can't do anything with it. If you look at the parcel section he's in, everybody gave it back to you guys. The county. I mean, you look at almost all of it, people, there used to be residents there. They tried to be residents there. And there's so many layers on his piece of property that we can't do anything. And every time we talk to one of you or we meet for meetings, we're passed on to someone else.
And then back to that person.
And then they pass us back over. And then, oh, you just need to do this. And I think that we have lost so many residents because of this. We have contacted them in that whole section and they just said, we can't do anything. So it goes back to county. We've even tried to buy some of that in auction, and it takes years for you guys to put that up in auction so that we can have access. We can't get to the property. We can't make it work. Even though we're allowed to, we're not allowed to.
Deeding rights, everything.
Yeah. So.
Could you run through some of the kind of restrictions you're running into specifically so that we understand better?
Yeah, he's got a lot of restrictions, but they're not really.
ODOT easement rights just coming right off the property onto my property. I mean, I have deeding rights on my thing saying I have access, and ODOT will not allow access. And then ODOT says I got to talk to you. You guys say I got to talk to ODOT, and it's just this runaround. And it's just the most annoyingest thing. No one wants to take accountability for this land out there. And that needs to be done. The city needs to be organized so then these properties can be properly utilized and used, and structure can be put out there for everyone. And on top, it is going to take 2 to 3, 4 years to be able to get police out there and get actual fire. And yes, a lot of this might be me having a water tender truck going to things. It's going to be a lot of people in that area trying to help out other people in the community to grow this area.
And maybe it doesn't need to be a city. Maybe it can be the rural mix, but we've got to be allowed to do some things. And, people need to help us get on and use the property that we have. Some of the other things we have is the sagebrush protection. We have a floodplain, we have mineral rights. What's our other restriction? Oh, he's got agriculture on his.
Yeah, I have homesteading rights on my property.
But the others above us have none. They can't build on theirs. Why? But then if we want to build, we have this sagebrush thing, and then we're restricted on that. But the access has been the biggest. He can't get on it. So
Ryan, how many years had you been dealing with it?
6 years with.
6 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
6 years. It's
I
insane.
feel it's even longer.
It
than
is
that,
actually really
but-
longer, but we've really been pushing the last 6 years.
For the last 6
And we
years.
get exhausted. I look at my notes.
This is
and about every
hers.
2 to
Mine looks like this.
Yeah, and about every 2 to 3 years, we get enough energy to try to talk again to someone. And I keep those voicemails and I keep the emails, and it always is sending us to someone else, and everybody's so nice, but they're always handing it off. And you get so confused about what you can do. And it's nothing. I mean,
So are you supportive of this incorporation voting yes or no for a city?
I'd like to understand.
That's what we're here about today.
Yeah,
It would help. It would help access and be able to give everyone growth and be able to actually look into things that haven't been getting looked at by other organizations. So then the right organization can say, this is a benefit for our community. We need to open these things up.
And does it need to be a city?
See, those are the things that, can it be the mixed rule?
It's for the city.
So, and I know it's for the city, but, yeah,
Thank you for our time.
If some of these things are federal or state in nature, I would imagine that they're going to show up in the comprehensive plan when it ultimately gets developed for this new city as well. And I don't think that will change anything. A floodplain covered under the comprehensive plan of the county versus a floodplain covered under the comprehensive plan of a city is still floodplain. So, and
We've gotten around the floodplain. We've
Yeah.
figured that one out. That's not the problem.
he's not, yeah, it really isn't a
We were
problem.
just telling you our layers of what we've had to go through. So that's one of the
Yeah.
problems that we have dealt with and taken care of.
We're told you guys were gonna remove that because it hasn't flooded there in over 100 years or
The
1,000
zoning was
years.
supposed to be changed 2 years ago and never
Yeah.
was never done. And
So
it
we
was
don't-
never even brought up as the plan like it was said to be done too.
Yeah, so we didn't see that happen either.
I was waiting for that and it just never went through. That was disappointing on the same level.
Yeah. But we've had professional people. My neighbor in California actually works for the United States, and he's a gemologist or geologist, and he looked at the flood plain. He goes, it's not really there. Wouldn't even have to do stilts or anything on every part of it.
we can flag your property to have some discussions with community development about outside of this discussion of incorporation too.
And access
I
to,
appreciate that.
that's the biggest thing is access.
It was me as a general contractor, project manager. This has been the biggest nightmare piece of property I've ever even seen. Scary. But I still got it and I want it and I like it and I like the area and I'd love to be able to be there.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah,
Thank
we'd like to see it developed. So we are in favor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I have one here, which is a first name Terry. Is that a different Terry? Okay, there we go. Spouse of Terry.
The other half.
Got it.
My name's Marion Terry, and coming into Bend, as we do from our original home where we live now, you can just see how it's busting at the seams, how stressed the city is, and the population, the traffic, the infrastructure is just like, are you kidding? You know, I mean, is this really working? And so when we got the idea from the letter about Mountain View, we thought, well, great, this will help Bend's whole infrastructure because it is just a city to go to. So I don't know why Mountain View wouldn't be, but there's a lot of underlining problems. As Andrew stated, very clear, all the different steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but who decides the size of this monstrosity of Mountain View? And now there's a map of, oh no, it's not going to be this, it's going to be this, but then no, this isn't going to happen because it wasn't approved. So is this the way Mountain View is going to be handled? Is it going to be changing all the time? I know who votes on the size of it. You know, it's just put out there. How do we know what size it's going to be? And when it comes to zoning or rezoning, who pays for that? Does the council, does the city of Bend? Who is that part of the budget? Do we have a say? You know, we got a letter, fine, but does that give us really any, structure to what we have to say? Then if there's a land use change, what is that going to do to our taxes other than the $2 per thousand? Who's going to pay for the rezoning? Who's going to pay for, oh, we have to improve Highway 20 because now you're a city and you're going to have a sewer and you're going to have water out there. There's the wells are 800 feet deep. Who has the money to pay for that? I agree with it's a good idea. But then when you look at, okay, there's the wilderness area that's incorporated in this proposal. There's BLM land, there's farmland, there's scattered residential land. When you take all that in consideration, is the county or who's paying for the tax area of the wilderness? Fine, it could be a big bonus for Mountain View because it is, quote, a wilderness area. I mean, that's people draws people. And do we get to vote on this infrastructure other than, you know, you get a letter and you're part of it and check this but you know, when you come down to finances, what is the bottom line? And the time span, I mean, it could go from 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years. And they keep adding $2, $4, $6 maybe to your total $1,000. That doesn't sound like a lot, but people, it's not a vast wealth, you know what I mean, for as far as incomes, it's a lot of property. And who decided this boundaries? I mean, this is vast. It's bigger than the city of Portland. So if you would downsize, I don't know what this is all about, you know, and I don't know. I think maybe if you downsize that way, there might be a better
we can wrap it up.
funding for the specific areas that they want to improve on. But
As you're wrapping up, could you, I'm not actually clear whether you are supporting or
I'm supporting
not
it.
supporting or uncertain.
I don't
about.
see a lot of support for us as people that own this property. You know, it's just like it's out there, but how do we know if we really get a say? And who votes on this? Do you guys vote on it? Does Ben vote on it? Is it through the county?
The people within the boundary will make if this goes to the voters, the people within the boundary will be the ones who vote on incorporation, and then they will be the ones who vote to elect city councilors who would be in charge.
That possibly maybe are overlooked completely because sure, I'd like to see Mountain View as a new city. It would be beneficial to Bend in so many ways, but then again, we have to look at the not just ABCs, but 1, 2, 3s under the ABCs more clearly, I feel.
So do you live on that property there, or are you a resident of that area?
I have property there.
Yeah, so you own property there.
Yes.
You're not a registered voter on that property. So it'd be the
No,
neighbors
I'm
would
not.
vote on it. That's the thing. It's the people that are in that proximity would vote on it. You'd be
Right.
property owner.
Another thing which caught my attention.
So yeah, let's wrap this up. I understand there's a lot of questions. And there's
If say you have this property and it's dry property, okay, do you have to have a well to, you know, to be under the specifications for Mountain View? Do you have to, or is it okay to have dry land? Do you have to put a sewer in? All that, I'm really in limbo on it because it's a big question for a lot of people.
Those would
Thank you.
be decisions that the city council of the
What's that?
those would be decisions that the city council of the new city would make.
Yeah, well, that's what was bothering me of some of the stuff.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for being there.
Thank you. Joe Merrill. Hello, Joe.
Hello, my name is Joe Merrill, and I have 120 acres out there, 58555 George Milliken Road. And I'm a lifer from Bend, and I've seen a lot of change over the 64 years I've been here. And I think change is inevitable, but doing it properly, I think, is a big thing. One of my big concerns out there is, first of all, the name. There's so much history of J.A. Smith and the Stone House and a lot of the heritage from back in the Milliken days. I love that stuff. I think the name should stay Milliken or some reference to Milliken. That's my first contention. But I'm willing to look at change if it's viable for everyone. My father was a contractor here, a developer. He used to do 80-acre plots. And I know the infrastructure that it takes, that was back in the 70s. Now it's much more intense. And so to propose a city out there and think you're going to have a water system or a sewage system or power, we all live off the grid out there. So how is all that going to be implemented? That's just a great big question mark for me. The other thing is, from my land, I've had 120 acres in the OHV riding area, and I stage 2 races a year. I have a permit with the BLM. I need to know how that's going to affect having a race inside the city, and how is it going to affect all those lands. And my third concern is the sage grouse mating. So I deal with, when I'm putting on my races, the sage grouse mating and the buffer zones are a great big deal. And I know that there's one on the west end of the proposed city, and that's going to envelop a big section of the city that I don't believe that there's going to be anything that people can do as far as building or that sort of thing. So I think there's just a lot of things involved in this that I don't see the groundwork laid for. What does that mean? I mean, how's that going to work? So that's my biggest things and questions that I have.
Great. Thank you for joining us.
Yep. Thank you.
Mr. Merrill.
And then Mr. Stephen Payer.
Are these opposition comments?
At this time is opposition, yes. So yeah, we transitioned from in favor to neutral and undecided. We've heard from each person. Now this is opposition comment.
Okay, my name is Stephen Payer. I'm a resident of Deschutes County since 1981. I presently live at 56200 Pine Mountain Road. I have the wonderful benefit of a western view that looks out over the entire horizon. First, I'd like to, where did Nicole go? You did yeoman's work on a 35-page memo that is just outstanding. And you need to be promoted and given a raise. I've been selling real estate for many years, and I've never seen a land use report done as extensive as that one. Secondly, I would encourage, I know you folks are busy, but I would encourage everyone up there to read all of the emails that were sent to the county, because there's a lot of good information, a lot of ideas. There's a lot of really careful thought in there. I read about 20 of them and came up with a rough straw count that it's about 75% opposed and 25% in favor. Currently, there are 6 large cattle operations out in that area. Proberts, the Roths, where I live, the Singhos family, Doug McGee, Jim Anspatch, and the Roses that are out on the old Moffett place. And I know for a fact that half of those people are opposed. The Roths own 3,400 acres, and I'm sure they are not interested in having a city out there. We have enough activity as it is. I think most of the people that live out there are there because they don't want to be in a community. I've never had anybody ask me over for cookies and coffee. They just like to be alone. Occasionally you'll see a big no trespassing sign, you'll see a sign that says you are being watched. I can't conceivably believe that those people want anything to do with the community, let alone having a community center where we can sit around a campfire and sing Kumbaya. So I'm almost amazed. And finally, in the 60s, that huge big piece of ground with all the 10-acre parcels right smack in the middle of that was subdivided. And it was one of those buy 10 acres in Oregon and for $5 and you can go live somewhere. Well, what is it? 60 years later, there's probably both hands and both toes or both feet, the number of people that actually live out there. I really don't think people want to live there. And Mr. Terry's idea of having, boy, people are going to flock to it. The average person, I think, that lives in Bend would have no idea how to start a generator, how to haul water, how to hook up a propane refrigerator or stove or the solar. It's just not conducive to what you'd find here living in the Providence subdivision. So once again, thank you for your time. And
Thank you for testifying.
Thank you, Mr. Pierre.
So is there anyone else for testimony on this matter? Oh, okay. Is there anybody online also? So I'll call for people online, and we do have somebody in the room at this time.
Good morning, Chair DeBone, Vice Chair Adair, and Commissioner Chang. For the record, my name is Rory Isbell. I'm a staff attorney with Central Oregon Land Watch. Our address is 2843 Northwest Lolo Drive, Suite 200, Bend 97703. I've got some written comments on this application that I'd like to hand you a copy of today, if you don't mind. I'll keep my verbal testimony today pretty short. Basically, Landwatch is in agreement with the staff report that's been put together. I agree with the comment we just heard. It's an excellent staff report. Some interesting issues that we don't think of all too often when it comes to incorporation of a new city. But it looks like staff did their research and found out what is required, and also identified several areas where this petition before you doesn't seem to live up or meet those criteria. I point out, we heard one comment from the applicant about the level of evidence, substantial evidence that must support the finding of compliance with the statewide land use planning goals. It is right there in the 1000 Friends of Oregon v. Wasco County case that this is just like any other land use decision. The Supreme Court said the county's determination must be supported in the record like any other county land use decision. As we reviewed the application materials, much like staff, we found that showing of likelihood of compliance with the 14 goals that apply to this property, the site of the Cascades, there's a lack of evidence and analysis showing that those goals are likely to be met upon incorporation. There's a few more details in our written comments, but I think I'll just leave it there today. We don't see a likelihood of the goals being met, which is the standard for incorporation of a new city. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone online with the raised hand feature for testimony on this matter? Okay, we're not seeing anybody else, and nobody else in the room. At this time, petitioner's rebuttal. Oh, we do have somebody. Oh, I thought you were saying no. Okay, yes, we do. Let's keep going. Sorry about that. Just a little miscommunication in the room. So we're going to bring you into as a participant to this Zoom. And you'll have audio and video available. So I'm not sure who's joining us yet.
Hi.
Maybe mention my name.
Can you hear me?
So yeah, T.A. Walker is.
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. I'm Tammy Walker, and my resident address is P.O. Box 871124 in Wasilla, Alaska. My husband and I are the property owners of 26730 Highway 20. My mother and my auntie live there now, and we do come back and visit. We've been longtime Bend residents before we moved to Alaska. I guess my first question would be, because of the boundary changes, how does that affect the 150 people that are required? And how many petitions did that affect, since they wouldn't be counted if they're not in the new boundary? So this may be all a moot point if we, if it goes back and you look at those numbers, and maybe it doesn't affect it at all. I don't know. But it was just.
Yeah, I'll leave that information for the petitioner on that, and we'll maybe be able to discuss that right after you're done here.
Oh, cool. The other thing is that we have, our property was grandfathered in, the house and everything else. Our well is 1,280 feet deep. And it is warm because it's through a lava tube. So we have to pump that out of our well into a cistern to let it cool. And so we don't wear the pump out, because that is a long way to pump water up. So there are water concerns out there. I realize that we can't vote. Andrew has pointed that out to me many, many times, that we cannot vote because we're not residents. I get that, but I still care about Central Oregon, and we still have our home there that we do come and visit. And like I said, my mom and auntie are living there. The Brothers Fire District Volunteer Fire Department was started by my late father-in-law, who got the grant to start that. And my son-in-law, or excuse me, my son and daughter-in-law are very involved in it. It only costs $25 a year to be part of the Brothers Fire Protection District. And for an additional $99, you have ground and air ambulance support, no matter where you are. So I would rather see the energy and money that, maybe he can get some more grants, since he really is dependent on grants to help expand and, actually do something different for the Brothers Fire Department. I mean, they do have a water truck, and they also have a lot of heavy equipment. So why not join forces with them if fire is the big thing? We have had the ambulance come out to our place. It took about 20 minutes. My brother was in a near fatal truck accident there, or he rolled his truck into a rock wall, and Air Life was there immediately. So, and we've always had really, really good response from the sheriff when we've had trespassing issues, which we have trespassing signs all over. And Andrew ignored those and went through those signs to get to the house. So I just have a lot of concerns about this, and I would really encourage you to vote no on this. I think the staff report does an excellent job in encompassing all these. So thank you very
much, Tammy.
Thank you.
And if your mother and aunt are registered voters within the proposed city area, then they would be able to vote on this.
Correct. They, and I've talked with them. At first, they were very excited about it. They thought it was going to be wonderful. And then the more they found out about it, it wasn't all what it was presented to them. And so they are like, wait a minute, this isn't exactly what we thought it was going to be. They thought it was going to be more of a joining and making a volunteer fire department like Alfalfa or enhancing Brothers.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much for your testimony. And next, Jeremy Hansen.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Well, I'm opposed to it. I've had a ranch place out there to go play on dirt bikes, 13 acres. I don't know if you need my address. It's here in Clackamas County, but it's 38822 Sandy Heights, Sandy, Oregon, 97055. I'm retired from the state of Oregon, but that's irrelevant to this. But I just don't think that this idea is very organized, and I'm with the staff's idea of denying it. I think there's a lot more education, a lot more knowledge, and same with the land use guys that were just on here talking to everybody. I think you're gonna, they're all talking about how hard this is, and I don't think Andrew's aware of it. And I have another thing that I'm opposed to is him doing trespassing. He stated in his testimony today that he's been out to every single property in that area. I have no trespassing signs on my property. I don't want somebody out there going in and out of it. And nobody else in that whole Golden View Ranch is the property I'm in. Nobody wants somebody showing up and walking in illegally. And that's another thing I'm opposed to. Thank you for the time.
Great. Thank you very much for your testimony. So Daryl Lawrence, maybe? Barnes, okay. Daryl Barnes.
Hello, yeah, I'm Daryl Barnes, and I live in the westernmost end of the proposed city boundary, and adamantly opposed to the proposal. One reason that I find a lot of misinformation in the application. The applicant has stated that we didn't have fire protection, which we do have. There's a map readily available online at Deschutes County Rural Fire Protection District number 2, which is the one we're in. And so it's pretty easy to source that information. I get the sense that the applicant just throws a lot of information out there and then expects us to disprove it. And it's pretty frustrating to have to even testify about it. It seems like pie in the sky to even do a city out there, given the problems with infrastructure, water, services, all of that. So, secondly, I get the sense that this is a disgruntled property owner. A couple of reasons. One, he gave the example of his car burning in the driveway and nobody would respond. And then also, he's got violations on record with the county for building without permits out there on Ford Road. And I think a lot of these people in favor of this proposal are disgruntled property owners because they didn't do their due diligence and find out what can be done on that property in the zoning. And now they're frustrated because they can't do whatever they want. And if you go out Ford Road, it's like the wild, wild west out there. Some of it looks like Hunnell Road did a few months ago. It's a mess. And so I again feel like it's an attempt to create their own fiefdom and do what they want with their properties.
Thank you very much for sharing, Daryl.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Barnes.
Have a good day. Anyone else? Get real clear. Okay, nobody else. So at this time, this will be a rebuttal from petitioner. I want to thank everybody for sticking with us today. It's been quite a long morning, but this is a kind of, big process. I'm just going to stand up for a moment while we get transitioned here. Yeah, anybody could or should. Yeah. In a couple hours.
Oh, that's right. We started at 8:30,
I
didn't we?
know. It's not good sometimes.
Yes.
rough on what's body, right? Is he taking him? I'm gonna run to the restroom.
Yeah, okay, so we are gonna officially take a break just for a moment. No, reconvene when he's ready. Okay, thanks for reconvening back. We have the rebuttal from the petitioner on the Mountain View, City of Mountain View Incorporation request. Please proceed.
Thanks again. So to pick up where we left off with the presentation, it has my rebuttal information. I made sure not to include any personal information in said rebuttal and try to address misconceptions moreover. I would like to highlight, because of public comment, that the proposed boundary was initiated, as I mentioned previously, based off of the historical grazing grounds of George Milliken. And per ORS, the requirement to start the petition to circulate requires 150 residents, which this encompasses. I'm sure my attorneys and the county's attorneys could battle on that matter forever. To allude to that, just examples of counties that have incorporated that have fallen well below that 150 person threshold. So, I mean, I think we can debate that forever. I would also like to highlight that the Land Watch and DLCD touched on the compliance portions a little bit, and I am very confident that after speaking with our regional facilitator for DLCD, that if we use the exemption to goal 14 related to goal 3 and 4, as also described in 1,000 Friends of Oregon versus Wasco County, we would meet the exemption requirements for the proper urban growth boundary. And like I said, the boundary for the entire city is so big because of population, which then really only a small area applicable would be for urban growth set aside. So that was for that portion. So to address the misconception of water, I would like to highlight that contrary to common assumptions, the geographical area in question does not significantly impact the recharge rate for Bend Aquifer or the entire basin. Unfortunately, there lacks comprehensive government collected data concerning the aquifer below Milliken within our local community and its relationship to the entire basin. This was highlighted with my discussions at the Salem level for the Oregon Water Resources Department. Additionally, I have pretty conclusive information about the long-term water levels in this area going off of my neighbor's wells. And unlike many areas, when you go to pursue water rights, that data is not there. So I was given homework to collect this data on my own. There are wells in Hampton and in Bend, obviously, that are used for government terms for observation. Also, within the major proposed boundary, the average well depth is 400 feet.
Do you know how many gallons per minute?
And I'm saying that for neighbors wise. The well less than half a mile from me can pull 10 to 50,000 gallons of water a day for watering cattle. I know that our water regional master quoted rates and information that may not be directly applicable to our area because we have no observation wells in that area. And we're drawing those conclusions from Hampton and the western boundary in Bend. Also in regards to just communications, how we could use water initially, it is clear that if you look at the big picture, 80% of our water usage in Deschutes County is attributed to farms. 2% of that is attributed to municipal services, and then the rest stays within the streams. And these figures were in the Bend Bulletin and highlight the fact that this area is heavily EFU designated, and year by year, we are finding a substantial loss in revenue rather than success for our Deschutes County farms as a whole.
Dr. Essen, are you tracking the forthcoming groundwater allocation rules that are that Oregon Water Resources Department is working on right now?
Yeah, that's part of the homework I was tasked with for them, and a way to apply for said rights before those are enacted and make it more difficult.
Yeah, I mean, the interim rules that are already in place are resulting in likely denials of municipal groundwater permit applications already. And, with those forthcoming rules, I don't think it's going to be feasible for a community water system to secure new groundwater rights in the Deschutes Basin.
I appreciate that concept. As I highlighted in the petition and through the proper departments, that before the requirement of the 2,500 or more population threshold is achieved in establishing those metrics, which may never happen. We could highlight that as well. According to population statistics, shared wells are a viable option that fall within the exemptions in those parameters, given you can pull 15,000 gallons a day per tax lot private well, and the average water use is 300 gallons. The department told me we can have 3-ish to 4 households on that well. That's highlighted here. I have also been experimenting with some of these alternative technologies on my own to see their viability. And whether or not they could be implemented at a big picture. And there are several municipalities throughout the world that are using these technologies for substantial water procurement outside of draining aquifers, and that can be attributed to rain and snow water collection through proper filtration, as well as atmospheric water collection. And there are different levels of atmospheric water collection, from harvesting fog all the way down to the 10%, 15% humidity, relative humidity level in the air, where you are condensing air through rapid change in temperature and harvesting that water. That's the method that I've been testing at my property, and it has proven substantial. Obviously, these come with costs. Given my background in my PhD, I think it becomes more obtainable though. So as far as wastewater systems are concerned, Bend has one of the, I would say, more sustainable wastewater systems compared to a lot of major incorporated areas. Alternatively, we're trying, I know their methods are oriented in trying to restore some of the water into irrigation districts, as well as reusing the waste, solid waste on the agricultural land itself. And that is depicted just straight from the City of Bend's website. Kind of opposite of that, major statistics show that 80% of major municipal services dump untreated or not treated well enough water back into our environment. And this create hardship for the welfare of animals in the long run, and that there are great systems in place to prevent this from happening and basically create a closed loop system. So these are referred to as direct potable reuse systems. 2 cities in Texas, Big Spring and Wichita Falls, have successfully developed DPRs to bolster drinking water supply so far. I know inherently this sounds kind of nasty or gross. But if you look at big picture, you can't create nor destroy matter. So we've all been drinking this relatively forever, the same material has been some part of an animal or et cetera for life. Whereas the indirect potable reuse system is more of the standard method currently. I would also like to highlight that El Paso and Los Angeles are, as well as San Diego, are currently developing strategies so that they can successfully implement DPRs once those regulations are in place. And according to DEQ, Oregon approves the use of said recycled water for direct reuse on a case-by-case basis. I have some familiarity with this as well. So I just wanted to say thank you for your time. I'm very confident that though very challenging, I'm a very determined person. We could meet these statewide planning goals. And I've tried to highlight that if it was a requirement for the substantial evidence, it would be in the ORS, as well as very well highlighted in the LOSC documentation. I understand the pretense of turning to a case and pulling merits out of that case to rectify or strengthen your position. But nonetheless, I'm fairly confident in that, as well as securing funding. So to end it, engaging in politics is like embarking on a daunting expedition that not everyone dares to tread, but those who do shape the landscape of tomorrow. And I think that is very relevant in what I've experienced the last several weeks. In the end, the responsibility of the decision rests with you, the commission. With due respect, I kindly urge that you cast your vote in favor of advancing the petition to the ballot. And this would ensure that the voices of the residents and the voters who hold the ultimate stake have the opportunity to shape the final outcome. Thank you for listening, and I know that you guys will make the correct decision.
Question for you. We have this big footprint that's proposed, and then the UGB itself, you were, kind of had that oval at one point on the slide. Is there some analysis on that oval? I mean, what's the tax base and the population of a smaller footprint within there? I'm thinking it's just a fraction of the whole big picture.
So the oval is more in demonstration of what the presumed newly elected city council could create. For an ease of compliance to statewide planning goals for the urban density. There are no statistics on the calculations within that, and that's why the boundary area is so large. And that's why communicating with the the correct organizations, the distinction between the requirement of your city boundary versus your urban growth boundary, though we would be very unique, is warranted and legal.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's the graphic. Well, as I say, I mean, urban growth boundary is the taxable tax base is what is the catch I'm seeing here. So that's going to be smaller than that $30,000 or $17,000 number even.
So per state law, the city boundary is the tax base. The urban growth boundary is the urbanizable district.
Okay, well, we'll learn about that. Thank you very much. Any other questions? Yep.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Okay, and then Nicole, we'll bring this home, finish it up a little here.
Thank you, commissioners. I wanted to just bring to your attention, we did get a letter during the public comment portion, so wanted to enter this into the record. It is from Thousand Friends of Oregon and is essentially just expressing opposition to the petition, support for the staff report, and concern with compliance with statewide land use goals.
And you're referring to what was handed to us.
That is separate. That is from
Okay, different.
Land Watch. So we did get email version only of 1,000 Friends.
From Thousand Friends. Oh, okay, good. I'm glad I asked. Okay.
With that, staff in listening to the petitioner's presentation, rebuttal, and public comment, we find that our recommendation remains the same. We do not believe that those three criteria are met and recommend denial. But we do welcome any questions that the board may have. And I do have Chris Bell and Stephanie Marshall and Peter Gutowski here as well to answer questions.
Okay, so at this time, from our hearings procedure process, we can either keep a record open or close the record and then either get to deliberations or schedule deliberations, depending on our choices here. So is there support for closing the record, written and or oral and or written, either way?
If we close it at this time, then we can read that letter from Thousand Friends after the meeting then?
Oh, yeah. So that would be, I would acknowledge that be in the record and we haven't seen it though. Yeah. Thanks for clarifying. I'm supportive of closing the record at this time.
Right, as long as we can read that letter.
Support that. Okay, so yeah, closing the written and oral record. So this public hearing is closed on this matter with the input as provided, including the email from Thousand Friends of Oregon. So Commissioner Dare, you thinking you want to read that email before we get to deliberations or?
Well, depends what the other two of you think. I am glad that we're able to read it though. But as Nicole just paraphrased it, that she said they actually supported what our staff recommendation was, and that hasn't changed.
Yeah. Well, I'm supportive of deliberating at this time though, too, understanding that we haven't read that letter, but it's in alignment with what we've seen here and the written input from the agencies and yeah.
I can do that.
Okay, so yeah, let's proceed with deliberations.
Okay.
Okay, so at this time, we are deliberating on this topic, the decision of sending this petition for incorporation of Mountain View to the voters of that area or not, depending on the three criteria that were mentioned. Anybody want to proceed with any thoughts?
You may start if you like.
Was that?
You may start if you'd like.
Yeah. Okay. So as I say, I'm starting this off just looking at the three different items: tax rate and services. This is a large dispersed area. There's the concept of a smaller urban growth boundary, a developable area in the large area. Kind of puts you in the conundrum of who would be on the city council or not. The tax rate at $2, proposed at 30,000, but maybe 17,000, I think would even be smaller. I don't know that we need clarity on that or not, but I mean, we're not going to tax the outer edges of a footprint when you can only urbanizable in a very small area. It is that compliance with land use scenario of, the comprehensive plan will solve all those questions, but this is before that. There's no real history of the crossroads of it was the petitioner mentioned the grazing areas of the Milliken family, so that's good to understand the kind of the footprint of this. But that's not the crossroads of a town. There's not a lot of history there. The Milliken store and that rural commercial service center, I've always been a proponent of, well, maybe something could be done there. But that's just one property, and it's not even multiple properties at that point in time. So as I say, I'm starting to kind of come to that conclusion that it's not ready to proceed.
Well,
I don't want to say too much more.
Well, no, when you look at the information that Andrew provided, all these small cities, which I know most all of them, they're all only the largest one is Lone Rock, and that's 1.01 square miles. So yes, they can be small cities, but the area is so, in comparison to 265 square miles, it just seems like it's really not quite the right decision for that community at this moment in time. And yet, I feel it is Deschutes County. When you drive out there, I would like to see some really positive things happen to that community that would be beneficial, but I'm not I just don't think this is the right decision.
My biggest concern is with the proposed taxation rate and the proposed services. I would like to see a more clear and detailed business plan for what services we're talking about, how much revenue is going to be generated, how dependent on external grants providing that service is going to be, so that we can evaluate whether it's actually feasible or not. Based on what I've heard today, I am pretty skeptical that more meaningful services could be provided with the taxation rate we are discussing here. I also have concerns about whether all of the lands within the various boundaries that we've talked about would have benefit from this proposal. There's a massive amount of federal land in the boundary. There's a lot of resource zone land, which shouldn't have anything to do with urbanized incorporated cities. So that's probably my second significant concern. The third criteria can could this new city comply with the relevant statewide planning goals, comp plan goals and policies, et cetera? That's open to, debate. But as we've heard from a number of people, it is a very heavy lift to comply with all of the requirements for municipal or local governments under the Oregon State Land Use Planning System. I would lean towards not advancing this to the voters as well.
So kind of bringing a big picture item back together here. So we've got the big city of Bend. You drive about 20 miles, and it used to be a day's horse ride out to Milliken, and then you get to Brothers and you get to Hampton. You brought the table of the small cities around the state of Oregon, 1 square mile or less, and a population of 0 to 30. My point is there's going to be something going to happen here. It's going to be interesting because high-speed internet, Amazon home delivery, solar opportunities, batteries that are coming around, water that was just pointed out, water, disposal is always important, but there is an opportunity for something different. And as I say, Milliken itself is that small little rural service center. It used to be something, and has been land use approved out there for RV occupancy, just overnight RV. And, that's possible still. So there's still something that could happen out here. But yeah, for this large footprint and what we're talking about in the state land use system, come to that same conclusion. So if somebody wants to make a motion.
Let's see. Is there an attachment? I move recommending denial of the incorporation of the new city of Mountain View, the file number 247-23-000587-TA.
I mean, should the motion be about sending the question to the voters, or should it be about denying the proposal?
I think it's a quasi judicial decision on a land use application, and the outcome of that is sending it to the voters. So, yeah.
Okay. I mean, if legal thinks that works as a motion,
I was going to ask Stephanie or Chris to weigh in, as they're the ones.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Good afternoon now. Commissioner Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. The petition to incorporate requests the board serving as the county court make a decision whether to allow the petition or deny the petition. And if you're allowing the petition, then it gets sent to the voters. So I think that by specifying the motion and the board's actions in that regard, you will be making your decision.
Okay. Yeah. So a motion to deny the petition is sufficient.
Correct.
Okay. I will second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any other discussion?
The one good thing, I think maybe one of the good things, you never know, but hearing from Ryan and his mother today and their issues and the back and forth that they've been dealing with, hopefully something positive can come out of their 6 years of passing it back. So hopefully we can do something about that, Ryan.
And then also acknowledging there was a incorporation vote of Southern Deschutes County and Lapine area, which was like the whole South County. So that this has happened before, where then it got dialed back into a lot more defined footprint with the water and sewer district and the crossroads of the town. So maybe it's a natural step that's happening here. So we're in the middle of a motion. Any other discussion?
I guess I would say at the really high level, I believe that most proposals to incorporate are in part driven by a desire to control your own future. And that is an extremely important goal. And at the high level, I very much support, helping people control their own future. In this case, though, incorporation comes with both a tremendous amount of responsibility, and it also comes with a really big price tag in terms of acquiring the services that are going to be needed. And on those, on those grounds, I just do not think that this proposal is ripe to take on those responsibilities and generate the kind of investment that's needed to see it through.
Anything else? Seeing none, Commissioner Dare,
Yes.
Commissioner Chang,
Yes.
and Chair votes yes. So yeah, the decision has been made. Thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for sticking with us. This was a long process. And yeah, let's communicate amongst ourselves now too. I mean, this was the official process.
Commissioners, I just wanted to note that we will return with a board order recognizing the board's decision, and I think we can do that under potentially other items next Wednesday. So we'll coordinate accordingly with.
Great.
Thank you.
So yeah, the official record will be next week. Okay. Thank you. Anything else for this meeting? I'm going to close up the meeting and then you can say to whoever's here. So at this time, meeting adjourned, but yeah, please. I walked up here.